Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're building in our Minecraft world while I tell you about someone who leaked their own scandal to get revenge. And honestly, it worked a little too well. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this spiral of calculated revenge turned into a prison of their own making. Before we dive in, I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting this channel. Seriously, it means more to me than you might realize. Your engagement keeps this community alive and motivates me to keep creating. So our story begins when they discovered their ex-business partner was planning to destroy their reputation with half-truths about their failed startup. Instead of waiting to become the victim, they decided to leak their own scandal first, a carefully crafted narrative that made them look vulnerable but honest, while subtly exposing his embezzlement. I discovered my ex-business partner was planning to destroy me about 3 months after our startup officially collapsed. We'd spent 2 years building this company together, poured everything into it, and when it failed, we both walked away bitter. I thought we'd just go our separate ways, lick our wounds, maybe never speak again. That would have been fine. That would have been normal. But then I got a message from a mutual friend, someone who still talked to both of us, and she told me I needed to be careful. She said he'd been asking around about me, digging up old stories, twisting things we'd done together into this narrative where I was the villain and he was the victim. She said he was planning something big. I didn't believe it at first. I mean, we'd both made mistakes with the company. We'd both burned through investor money faster than we should have. We'd both overpromised and underdelivered. But when I started digging, when I started asking other people what they'd heard, the picture got clearer. He wasn't just venting to friends. He was building a case. He'd been collecting screenshots, emails, Slack messages, anything he could use to paint me as incompetent, reckless, maybe even fraudulent. He was going to post it all online, tag our investors, tag industry people we both knew, and basically make sure I'd never work in tech again. The thing is, I knew something he didn't think I knew. About 6 months before the company folded, I'd noticed some weird transactions in our accounts. Nothing massive, but enough to make me suspicious. I'd confronted him about it, and he'd explained it away as contractor payments or software licenses or some other boring expense I didn't want to dig into. I let it go because I trusted him. That was my mistake. But I'd kept the records, I'd kept everything, and when I went back and actually looked at those transactions with fresh eyes, with the eyes of someone who now knew this guy was willing to destroy me, I saw it. Fake invoices, payments to shell companies, money disappearing into accounts I couldn't trace. He'd been embezzling from our own startup, siphoning off investor funds while I was out there pitching and hustling and trying to make the thing work. So I had a choice. I could wait for him to strike first, let him control the narrative, and then try to defend myself after the fact. Or I could do something insane. I decided to leak my own scandal. I spent about a week crafting this post. It had to be perfect. It had to sound vulnerable, honest, like I was someone finally coming clean about their mistakes. I wrote it like a confession. I admitted that our startup had failed. I admitted that I'd made bad decisions, that I'd been in over my head, that I'd let people down. I took full responsibility for things that were genuinely my fault. And then, buried in the middle of this very human, very relatable story about failure and lessons learned, I mentioned the financial irregularities. I didn't accuse him directly. I just said I'd discovered some transactions I didn't understand, and that I'd reported them to our investors and was cooperating with their internal review. I made it sound like I was being transparent, like I was doing the right thing by coming forward. I posted it everywhere at once: Reddit, Twitter, LinkedIn. I tagged it with startup failure hashtags, entrepreneur confession hashtags, all the things that would make it spread. And then I waited. It went viral in under 48 hours. People loved it. They loved the vulnerability, the honesty, the willingness to admit failure. They loved that I wasn't making excuses or blaming anyone else. The post got thousands of upvotes on Reddit, tens of thousands of retweets, hundreds of comments from other founders saying they'd been through the same thing. I became this accidental symbol of healthy entrepreneurship, of owning your mistakes and learning from them. Business publications started reaching out for interviews. Podcasts wanted me on to talk about failure and resilience. But that wasn't even the worst part. Within about 72 hours, some journalist who'd seen my post decided to dig into the financial irregularities I'd mentioned. And because I'd framed it as me being transparent and cooperative, it didn't look like I was accusing anyone. It looked like I was worried about what I'd discovered. So when this journalist started investigating, they weren't investigating me. They were investigating the company, which meant they were investigating him. They found everything: the fake invoices, the offshore accounts, the shell companies, email chains where he'd been setting this up for months, maybe even over a year. They found messages between him and some sketchy consultant talking about how to move money without raising red flags. They found proof that he'd been planning to blame me for the company's financial problems while he walked away with a couple $100,000 he'd quietly stolen. And they found his emails to former employees and investors, the ones where he was building his smear campaign against me, asking leading questions, trying to get people to say negative things about me on the record. The story broke about a week after my original post. He got arrested, actual arrested, fraud charges, embezzlement, the whole thing. His wife left him within days. The new company he'd started, the one he'd been building while planning to destroy me, completely folded because no investor would touch him. Everything in his life just collapsed. And I became a hero. People started calling me a whistleblower. They praised my courage for coming forward, for being honest even when it was hard, for exposing corruption even though it meant admitting my own failures. I got speaking requests. I got job offers. I got LinkedIn messages every single day from people telling me I was inspiring, that I had integrity, that I was exactly the kind of founder the industry needed more of. But here's the thing: I didn't do it because I had integrity. I did it because I wanted revenge. I wanted to destroy him before he could destroy me. I just got really, really lucky that he'd actually committed crimes, and that my carefully crafted, vulnerable confession made me look like a good guy instead of what I actually was, which was someone weaponizing transparency. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. Alright, back to the aftermath of my perfectly executed revenge plot. Now I'm stuck. I'm stuck maintaining this image of myself as someone who did the right thing for the right reasons. Every interview I do, I have to talk about the importance of honesty and accountability. Every panel I sit on, I have to pretend that I came forward because I cared about our investors or our employees or the integrity of the startup ecosystem. Every time someone calls me brave, I have to smile and say thank you and not tell them that I was just trying to burn someone before they could burn me. I won. I destroyed him completely. He's facing criminal charges. His reputation is gone. His marriage is over. His career is finished. And I'm getting job offers and speaking fees and invitations to exclusive founder events. But I also created this version of myself that I now have to be forever. This whistleblower, this ethical entrepreneur, this person who chose truth over self-preservation. And the longer I maintain it, the more trapped I feel. Because if I ever admit what I actually did, if I ever tell anyone that my confession was strategic instead of sincere, that I leaked my own scandal specifically to trap him, then everything falls apart. The speaking gigs disappear. The job offers vanish. Everyone who praised me looks like a fool for believing me. So I keep doing the interviews. I keep accepting the awards. I keep posting on LinkedIn about integrity and transparency and doing the right thing even when it's hard. And every single time, I feel like a fraud. Because I am a fraud. I'm not a whistleblower. I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who got really good at weaponizing vulnerability and happened to catch an actual criminal in the blast radius. Winning doesn't always feel like winning when you have to live the lie forever. I destroyed him, but I also built a cage for myself. A cage made of other people's admiration, of a reputation I don't deserve, of an image I can never drop without destroying everything I've built since. He's in jail. I'm free. But somehow, we're both trapped by what I did. And the worst part? I do it again. Every single time. Because at least I chose my own destruction. At least I'm the one who decided what story got told. At least I got to win, even if winning meant becoming someone I'm not. That's the trade I made, and I'm still not sure if it was worth it. But at least I chose my own destruction. The person in our next story had no idea what was coming when they hit send on the wrong email. I need to be honest about something that's been eating at me for months now. Everyone at work thinks I'm some kind of corporate whistleblower hero. They think I carefully planned this massive exposure of executive misconduct. The truth is so much stupider than that, and I'm absolutely terrified someone's going to figure it out. So here's what actually happened. My manager, let's call her Diana, was one of those micromanagers who made everyone's life miserable. Every single thing had to go through her. She'd Slack me at 9 p.m. asking why I used a semicolon instead of a comma in an email. She'd schedule meetings to discuss meetings. She once made me redo a presentation 17 times because the shade of blue wasn't quite right. It was exhausting. One Friday night, I'd had a few drinks with some friends, and I was in that perfect zone of tipsy where everything seems both hilarious and infuriating at the same time. Diana had sent me another one of her ridiculous Slack messages earlier that day, something about how my font choices were negatively impacting team morale. I wish I was making that up. I took a screenshot to send to my friend Maya, who worked at a different company but loved hearing about my workplace disasters. Except I didn't just screenshot the Slack message, I screenshotted my entire desktop, and in the background, barely visible, was Diana's calendar that I'd pulled up earlier when trying to schedule a meeting with her. She shared her calendar with the whole team, so it wasn't like I was snooping. I just needed to find a time slot that worked. I fired off the email to Maya with a subject line that said something incredibly professional like, "Can you believe this woman?" and included about 3 paragraphs of me just absolutely roasting Diana's management style. Then I passed out on my couch still wearing my work clothes. I woke up Saturday morning to 47 missed calls and my phone absolutely exploding with notifications. My stomach dropped before I even looked at what was happening. You know that feeling when you just know you've done something catastrophically stupid, but your brain hasn't caught up to what it is yet? That. I opened my email and my heart actually stopped. The email I'd sent wasn't to Maya. It was to the leadership team distribution list. Every single executive in the company, the CEO, the CFO, the VP of operations, all of them, and it had gone out at 2:07 a.m. I wanted to die. I wanted the earth to open up and swallow me whole. I started frantically typing an apology email, my hands shaking so hard I could barely use my phone. But before I could send it, I got a message from our CEO's assistant telling me there was an emergency meeting at the office in 1 hour and my presence was mandatory. I showed up looking like absolute death. I'd thrown on the first clean clothes I could find, and my hair was still wet from the world's fastest shower. I walked into the conference room and it was packed. The CEO was there, the head of HR, our legal counsel, and notably absent were Diana and our VP of operations, Marcus. The CEO looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read and said we needed to talk about the email I'd sent. I immediately launched into this rambling apology about how it was meant for a friend, how I'd had too much to drink, how I knew it was unprofessional, and I was so sorry and I would understand if they needed to let me go. He held up his hand to stop me and said, "We're not concerned about your complaints about Diana's management style. We're concerned about what else was in that screenshot." I had no idea what he was talking about. I pulled up the email on my phone with shaking hands and really looked at the screenshot for the first time. And that's when I saw it. Diana's calendar was visible in the background, and there, repeating every single Tuesday and Thursday for the past 8 months, were calendar events labeled Private Meeting with M. No conference room listed, no agenda, just blocked off time, always from 6 to 8 p.m., always on days when most people had left the office. Marcus was our VP of operations. He was married with 3 kids, Diana was engaged, and apparently I'd just accidentally exposed their affair to the entire executive team. The CEO told me that after receiving my email, he'd asked IT to pull Diana and Marcus's message history. They found over 3,000 personal emails between them, explicit messages, photos, plans for weekend getaways that they'd both claimed were work conferences. They'd been using company resources, company time, and company travel budgets to conduct an affair for almost a year. I just sat there completely stunned. I'd been so focused on the embarrassing things I'd said about Diana's micromanaging that I hadn't even noticed I'd accidentally included evidence of something so much worse. Then came the breaking point. The CEO asked me if I'd sent the email deliberately, if I'd known about the affair and was trying to expose it. And here's where I made a choice that I'm still not sure was the right one. I could have told the truth, could have explained that I was just a drunk idiot who sent an email to the wrong people and didn't even notice the calendar in the background. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me. like I was some brave employee standing up against corruption. Maybe it was the fact that I was already in this meeting, and if I admitted it was an accident, I'd just be the drunk employee who sent an inappropriate email to executives at 2 in the morning. Either way, I was probably getting fired. So I just said, I thought someone should know. The CEO nodded slowly and said he appreciated my courage in bringing this to light, that it took guts to risk my career to expose misconduct, that the company needed more employees who weren't afraid to speak up. I felt like I was going to throw up. By Monday morning, Diana was fired. Marcus resigned before they could fire him too. And here's where it gets absurd. The CEO called an all-hands meeting and announced that there had been some leadership changes, that after a thorough investigation into executive misconduct, they discovered serious policy violations and conflicts of interest. He didn't name Diana and Marcus specifically, but everyone knew. Offices are like small towns. Word spreads faster than wildfire. Then he said that in light of recent events, they were promoting someone who had demonstrated integrity and moral courage, someone who wasn't afraid to do the right thing, even when it was difficult. He promoted me to Diana's position, the job I'd been complaining about her having literally 2 days earlier. My co-workers started treating me differently immediately. They thought I'd been playing some kind of long game, that I'd deliberately gathered evidence and strategically exposed Diana to take her job. People kept coming up to me saying things like, I always knew you were smarter than you let on. And that was such a power move. I wanted to scream that it wasn't a power move. It was a drunk mistake. But I couldn't, because now I had Diana's job, her salary, her office. If I admitted the truth, I'd lose everything and look like an idiot. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. About a week after I started in the new role, Marcus's wife showed up at the office, just walked right past security and into the executive floor. She was looking for Marcus, didn't know he'd already resigned. When someone told her he didn't work there anymore, she started crying in the middle of the hallway and asking if anyone knew where he was because he'd moved out and wasn't returning her calls. Then Diana's fiancé showed up. He'd apparently just found out about the affair and wanted to confront her. When he found out she'd been fired, he asked to speak to whoever had reported her because he wanted to thank them personally. Someone pointed at me. This man, who'd just had his life destroyed, came over and shook my hand, told me I'd done him a favor, that he'd rather know now than after the wedding, that I'd saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. I felt like the worst person alive. I didn't save him from anything. I was just an idiot who couldn't work email while drunk. But I couldn't say that, so I just nodded and said I was sorry he had to go through this. He actually hugged me, said I had more integrity than most people he'd met. The whole situation is completely out of control now. I've been in this position for 3 months and I'm genuinely good at it. Turns out when you're not being micromanaged into oblivion, you can actually get things done. My team likes me. The executives trust me. I got a raise last month, but I live in constant fear that someone's going to check the metadata on that email, that they'll see it was sent at 2 a.m. on a Friday, that they'll wonder what kind of whistleblower sends evidence of corporate misconduct in the middle of the night after what was clearly a night out drinking, that the whole house of cards will come crashing down. I can't tell anyone the truth. My best friend Maya knows, obviously, since she was supposed to be the recipient of that email. But everyone else thinks I'm some kind of strategic genius who planned this whole thing, and the longer it goes on, the harder it is to come clean. Sometimes I lie awake at night thinking about how one drunk email completely changed my life, how I'm living a lie but also kind of not, because I am doing a good job. I did expose misconduct, even if it was by accident. But does intent matter? Is accidental whistleblowing still brave? I got a LinkedIn message last week from someone at another company asking if I'd be interested in interviewing for a VP position because they'd heard about my reputation for integrity and standing up against corruption. They want to hire me based on a lie, based on a reputation I built on being bad at email while intoxicated. The worst part is I'm actually considering taking the interview, because what if someone here does eventually check that email metadata? What if Diana or Marcus decides to cause problems and digs into exactly how their affair got exposed? What if I just keep moving up, job to job, based entirely on an accident that everyone thinks was calculated brilliance? I'm a fraud, but I'm a successful fraud, and I genuinely don't know which is worse, coming clean and losing everything, or living with this secret forever. So, yeah, that's how I accidentally destroyed two people's careers, broke up two relationships, and became the office hero. All because I couldn't figure out how to send an email to the right person after 3 cocktails. It's almost funny how perfectly it backfired. Just not for the people you'd expect. Speaking of calculated moves, the next person didn't just stumble into revenge. They engineered an entire online trap. My girlfriend Emma started going to this women's wellness group every Thursday night around 6 months into our relationship. At first, I thought it was great. She'd been through some stuff with her ex, and if she wanted a safe space to process that with other women, I was all for it. She called it her healing circle, said it was really progressive and trauma-informed, all the buzzwords that made it sound legitimate and supportive. I never questioned it. Why would I? She seemed happier, more grounded. Every Thursday she'd leave around 7, come back around 10:30, sometimes 11, completely drained, but in that good way where you've done emotional work and feel lighter for it. She'd talk about breakthroughs and boundary setting and collective healing. I'd make her tea and let her decompress. I was the supportive boyfriend. I was doing everything right, except I wasn't asking the right questions. And honestly, why would I? She never gave me a reason to doubt her. The group was invite only, very private, very exclusive. She said they had a strict no partners policy to protect everyone's vulnerability. Made sense. I respected that boundary. I didn't pry. I didn't ask for details. I just trusted her. Then her laptop died. Just completely bricked itself one Thursday afternoon. Wouldn't even turn on. She had her session that night and panicked because apparently they did everything virtually now. Something about accessibility and creating safer spaces for people in different cities. She asked if she could borrow mine. Of course I said yes. I logged her into my secondary account, showed her where everything was, and went to the gym to give her privacy. Came back 2 hours later, she was already in bed, said the session had been intense and she needed to sleep. I didn't think anything of it. The next morning, I opened my laptop to check my email. Discord was still open. She'd forgotten to log out. I should have closed it. I should have just logged her out and moved on with my day. But the server name caught my eye. It wasn't called Women's Wellness Circle or Healing Space or anything like that. It was called Evolving Together, and the icon was a photo of a guy I recognized. Her ex-boyfriend Matt, the one she said she'd cut off completely 2 years ago, the one she said was manipulative and controlling, the one she was supposedly healing from in this exact group. I sat there staring at the screen for a solid minute, trying to make it make sense. Maybe he'd hacked the server. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Then I scrolled up. It wasn't a therapy group. It was a private Discord server run by Matt, and there were 12 women in it. 12. All of them his exes. All of them participating in what he called their spiritual journey together, with him as the guide. There were voice channels labeled things like deep dive sessions and one-on-one healing. There were text channels for daily gratitude, trauma processing, and something called sacred vulnerability. And there was a channel called subscription tiers. I clicked on it. There were 3 levels: bronze for $50 a month, which gave you access to group sessions; silver for $150, which included private voice calls with Matt; and gold for $200, which included weekly one-on-one sessions, personalized guidance, and something he called energetic alignment work. Emma was gold tier. She'd been paying him $200 a month for 6 months. I felt like I was watching a car crash in slow motion. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of elaborate prank or performance art or something. But I kept scrolling, and it just got worse. The messages were insane. Matt would post these long, flowery monologues about divine feminine energy and healing through connection, and how all of them were on this sacred path together. He'd talk about how society had conditioned them to see him as the villain, but really he was their guide, their mirror, their catalyst for growth, and they ate it up. They'd reply with paragraphs about how grateful they were, how seen they felt, how transformative this space was. Emma's messages were some of the longest. She'd write entire essays about her breakthroughs, her progress, her gratitude for his wisdom. But that wasn't even the worst part. I opened the private DMs. Matt had been sending nearly identical messages to at least 4 of the women. The same compliments, the same spiritual language, the same late-night voice calls. I cross-referenced the timestamps. He was rotating between them. sometimes having calls with two different women on the same night, saying the exact same things, and it wasn't just emotional manipulation. The messages made it pretty clear he was sleeping with them. Different women in different cities. He'd schedule his visits around what he called alignment intensives, where he'd fly out for a weekend and spend quote-unquote private time helping them break through their blocks. Emma had an alignment intensive scheduled for next month, in Portland. She'd told me she was going to a wellness retreat. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I checked his profile. He listed himself as a certified holistic life coach and trauma-informed practitioner. He had a website, a whole professional operation, testimonials from women, none of whom I recognized from the server, all talking about how he'd changed their lives. He was charging people outside the server too. This wasn't just a weird ex situation. This was a whole business model. He was running a pseudo-therapy cult for his exes and charging them for the privilege. I sat there for maybe an hour just scrolling, screenshotting, trying to process what I was seeing. Part of me wanted to wake Emma up and confront her immediately. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never seen any of it. But mostly I just felt this cold, clarifying rage. Not even at her, really. At him. At the absolute audacity of this man to manipulate a dozen women, including my girlfriend, into paying him to continue controlling them under the guise of healing. I didn't confront Emma. Not yet. Instead, I made a burner Discord account, gave myself a generic username, a blank profile picture, and I joined the server. Nobody noticed at first. It was easy to slip in. The server was set to allow anyone with the link, probably so Matt could add new people without friction. I lurked for a few hours, reading through months of messages, downloading everything. The voice channel recordings, the DMs, the payment logs, everything. I archived the entire server. Every message, every file, every receipt. Then I waited until that night when I knew most of them would be online for the weekly group session. And I dropped the screenshots in the main channel. Not all of them at once, just enough to make the point. Screenshots of Matt sending the same message to 3 different women within the same hour. Screenshots of him scheduling overlapping calls. Screenshots of the payment tiers with his Venmo and PayPal linked, showing thousands of dollars in transactions. Screenshots of him telling one woman she was his divine counterpart, while telling another woman the exact same thing 2 days later. The server exploded. Within minutes, messages started flooding in. Confusion, anger, betrayal. Women who thought they were the only one getting private sessions, realizing he'd been saying identical things to everyone. Women who didn't know about the subscription fees, realizing others had been paying for access. Women who thought this was a legitimate healing space, realizing it was just Matt's personal harem with a spiritual rebranding. Matt logged on and immediately tried to do damage control. He posted this long, frantic message about how I was a toxic presence sent to disrupt their sacred work, how this was exactly the kind of fear-based thinking they'd been working to transcend, how they needed to trust the process and not let outside forces divide them. He tried to delete my screenshots, but I'd already posted them in multiple channels, and other people had already screenshotted them and reposted them. You can't delete the internet. He should have known that. Then came the breaking point. One of the women, someone named Jessica, posted a voice recording. It was from one of her private sessions with Matt. In it, he was coaching her through what he called a vulnerability exercise, which was just him asking increasingly personal and invasive questions while telling her this was part of her healing. She'd recorded it because she wanted to revisit the breakthrough later, but listening to it now with context, it was just obvious predatory manipulation. She posted it with a single message. I can't believe I paid him for this. That opened the floodgates. Other women started posting their own recordings, their own screenshots, their own stories. Turns out Matt had been running some version of this operation for years, just cycling through X's and new targets, rebranding it every time someone caught on. This wasn't even his first server. He'd had others. He'd been doing this since college. The server imploded. Women were leaving, deleting their accounts, confronting him directly in the chat. He tried to delete the entire server, but I'd already backed everything up. And I wasn't done. I found his employer. He worked part-time at a wellness center, running actual therapy groups, advertised himself as a licensed practitioner, Except he wasn't licensed. I checked. He had some online certification from a holistic coaching program, but nothing that qualified him to do actual therapy. I sent everything to the Wellness Center's director. Every screenshot, every voice recording, every receipt. I sent it anonymously from a burner email, with a polite note explaining that one of their facilitators was operating an unethical and potentially illegal side business. He lost his job within a week. The Wellness Center posted a public statement about terminating his contract due to ethical violations. His website went dark, his social media went private. Last I checked, he'd moved to a different state. Emma and I broke up, obviously. She tried to explain it, tried to say she didn't realize what it was, that she thought it was real therapy, that she'd been manipulated too. And maybe that's true. Maybe she really didn't see it. But she'd also been lying to me for 6 months, paying her ex $200 a month, planning secret trips to see him. I couldn't get past that. I didn't want to. She's in actual therapy now from what I've heard. I hope it helps. I really do. But Matt, that ex learned you can't delete the internet. And when you build your entire persona on manipulation, eventually someone's going to have receipts. My boyfriend was always really into music. Like, annoyingly into it. He'd make playlists for everything. Road trips, workouts, cooking dinner, you name it. I thought it was kind of sweet, honestly. He'd spend hours curating the perfect songs, organizing them by mood or vibe or whatever. I'm not that kind of person. I just put on a random playlist and call it a day. But he had this whole system, and I respected it. It was his thing. So when I started noticing he was making these playlists with really specific names, I didn't think much of it at first. There was one called November Memories, another one called Portland Weekend, one called Summer in Denver. I figured they were just nostalgic compilations, you know? Like, maybe he went to Portland once and had a good time, so he made a playlist to remember it. People do that. It seemed harmless. Then, one night, I was using his laptop because mine was charging in the other room, and Spotify auto-opened when I clicked on Chrome. I wasn't snooping, I wasn't trying to find anything. But there it was, his Spotify account. Already logged in, and the November Memories playlist was right there at the top of his recent activity. I clicked on it. I don't even know why. Curiosity, maybe. Boredom. And that's when I noticed the dates. The songs in November Memories weren't just random tracks he'd added over time. They were all added between November 2nd and November 4th of last year. All of them. 27 songs, all added during the same 3-day window. And I remembered that weekend. He'd told me he was going to a work conference in Portland. He'd been super busy leading up to it, stressed about his presentation, complaining about having to network with people he didn't like. I remembered because I'd offered to come with him and make it a little vacation, and he'd said it was better if I didn't because he'd be working the whole time anyway. I sat there staring at the playlist for a solid minute, trying to make sense of it. Why would he add 27 songs during a work conference? When would he even have time? And why name it November Memories like it was something special? Out of curiosity, I clicked on another playlist. Portland Weekend. Same thing. All the songs were added during that exact same weekend. November 2nd through 4th. So I clicked on another one. Summer in Denver. The songs were added during a weekend in July. I checked my calendar. That was the weekend he said he was visiting his parents. And here's where it gets absurd. I started going through every single playlist he'd made over the past year and a half. Austin Nights, Chicago Escape, Miami Sunrise, Seattle Rain. Every single one had the same pattern. The songs were all added during a specific weekend or a few specific days, and every single time, those dates matched up with a trip he'd told me he was taking for work, or to see family, or for some wedding or bachelor party or whatever excuse he'd used. I pulled up our shared Google Calendar. We've been sharing our location and calendars for like 2 years now. It was supposed to be a safety thing, you know, so we'd always know where the other person was in case of an emergency. I checked his location history for the Summer in Denver weekend. He was in Denver all right, but I also noticed he'd been at the same address for most of the weekend. I Googled the address. It was a boutique hotel downtown. I checked the location history for Portland weekend. He'd been in Portland, but again, same thing. He'd spent most of the weekend at a specific hotel, with a few trips to nearby restaurants and bars. Not a convention center, not a conference venue, a hotel. I went through every single playlist and cross-referenced the dates with his location history. Austin Nights. He'd been in Austin. Chicago Escape. Chicago. Miami Sunrise. Miami. Every single playlist corresponded to a city he'd actually been to, but none of them corresponded to work trips or family visits. They were all just him in a city at a hotel, adding songs to a carefully curated playlist, like he was making a romantic soundtrack. That's when it hit me. These weren't just playlists, they were trophies, little time capsules of whatever the hell he'd been doing on those trips, and I had a pretty good idea what that was. I pulled up the Portland Weekend playlist again and actually read the song titles this time. Electric Feel, Closer, Love on the Brain, Skin. It wasn't subtle. This wasn't a playlist for a work conference. This was a playlist for someone he was with, someone who wasn't me. I checked another one. Summer in Denver, same vibe. Slow Hands, Pillow Talk, Earned It. I felt sick. I went back through all of them. Every single playlist was packed with romantic songs, sexy songs, the kind of music you listen to when you're with someone you're trying to impress. And then I noticed something even worse. Each playlist had between 20 and 30 songs. That's not a quick throwaway playlist you make in 5 minutes. That's hours of work, hours of carefully selecting songs, organizing them, making sure they flow together. He'd spent hours on each of these, hours building little musical monuments to whatever affairs he was having. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went back to his location history and started looking at the specific addresses where he'd spent most of his time during these trips. I Googled a few of them, hotels like I'd thought, but I also noticed he'd been to the same restaurants, the same coffee shops, multiple times across different trips, different cities, same chains. It was like he had a routine, a system. And then I realized if he was going to all these cities and spending weekends at hotels and making playlists for each one, he probably wasn't seeing the same person every time. I opened Instagram and started searching his followers. I filtered by location: Austin, Chicago, Denver, Miami, Portland, Seattle. And there they were, women he followed who lived in those cities, women whose profiles were public, whose recent posts showed them at the same restaurants, the same bars, the same hotels that were in his location history. I matched the dates. One woman in Portland had posted a brunch photo on November 3rd at a cafe that was 2 blocks from where his location showed he was that same morning. He wasn't just cheating. He had a whole network, multiple women, multiple cities, an entire system of playlists, documenting every single affair like he was making a personal greatest hits album of his lies. I sat there for probably an hour, just going through everything. The playlists, the locations, the Instagram profiles, the dates. I felt like I was losing my mind. How had I not seen this? How had I believed every single excuse, every work trip, every family visit, every wedding in a city where he conveniently knew someone and could crash with them so he didn't need to get a hotel? He'd been so careful. He'd shared his location with me. He'd told me where he was going. He'd even sent me pictures sometimes, photos of conference name badges, photos of his parents' house, photos of his friend's wedding. But none of it was real. Or maybe some of it was real, and he just layered the lies on top so well that I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I didn't confront him right away. I couldn't. I was too angry, and I knew if I said anything, I'd completely lose it. So instead, I did something petty, something he would understand. I made my own playlist. I called it Evidence. I added every song I could think of with titles like Liar, Cheater, Goodbye, Before He Cheats, Since You've Been Gone, all the classics. And then I used Spotify's new feature where you can add descriptions and images to playlists. I took screenshots of his playlists, screenshots of the dates, the song titles, the locations. I took screenshots of his location history next to the women's Instagram posts. I compiled everything into one neat little package and uploaded it all to the playlist description. Then I shared it with him and with his entire family, his parents, his siblings, his cousins, everyone. I tagged them all. I made sure everyone could see it. He called me within 10 minutes, freaking out, asking what the hell I was doing, demanding I take it down, saying I was being crazy, that I didn't understand, that he could explain. I told him there was nothing to explain. His playlists explained everything. The timestamps, the locations, the song choices. He'd made a timeline of his own affairs, and I'd just put it on display. He couldn't even deny it. What was he going to say? That those weren't his playlists? That he hadn't been in those cities? That he hadn't carefully curated 20 to 30 songs for each one like he was making a romantic movie soundtrack? The evidence was right there, time-stamped, geotagged, organized by city and date. His mum called me. His sister called me. They'd all seen it. They were horrified. He tried to spin it, tried to say I was twisting things, that those were just music playlists, and I was reading into them. But his mum wasn't stupid. She'd seen the screenshots. She'd seen the locations. She knew what a work trip was supposed to look like, and this wasn't it. We broke up that night. Or I guess I broke up with him. He kept trying to apologize, kept saying he'd made mistakes, that he still loved me, that we could work through it. I told him to keep his playlists. Maybe he could make a new one called Single Again and add some sad breakup songs. He didn't think that was funny. I moved out the next week, took all my stuff, blocked him on everything, and never looked back. And you know what the wildest part is? I still think about those playlists sometimes. The sheer audacity of documenting every affair like it was a treasured memory. The hours he must have spent picking the perfect songs, organizing them, naming them after the cities where he'd cheated. It's almost impressive in a psychotic kind of way. At least that cheater had a creative system. The fiancé in our next story forgot about something much more terrifying. The dead don't usually text back. My fiancé had this whole tragic backstory that I thought made him deep. His ex-girlfriend, the love of his life before me, had died in a car accident 3 years before we met. He told me about her on our third date, got a little emotional, said he'd never really gotten over it but was trying to move forward. He kept photos of her in a box in his closet. He wore this silver bracelet she'd given him. Every year on the anniversary of her death, he'd take a weekend trip alone to visit her grave and process his grief. I thought it was sad but also kind of beautiful. It showed he had depth, that he could love deeply, that he honored the people who mattered to him. I never questioned it. Why would I? He seemed genuinely heartbroken whenever he talked about her. He'd get quiet on certain dates, the anniversary of when they met, her birthday, the day she died. He'd look at old photos sometimes and I'd give him space. When he went on those weekend trips to visit her grave, I'd text him supportive messages and tell him to take all the time he needed. I thought I was being the understanding girlfriend, the woman who could handle his past without feeling threatened. I actually felt proud of myself for being so mature about it. We got engaged last spring. I posted about it on Instagram, tagged him, did the whole ring photo thing. It was perfect. He seemed happy. We started planning the wedding, talking about our future, looking at apartments we could afford together. Everything felt right. Then I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "Ask him about the apartment in Denver." I stared at it for a minute, figured it was spam or a wrong number, and almost deleted it. But something made me pause. We didn't know anyone in Denver. He'd never mentioned Denver. I was about to ignore it when another message came through. "He still has our Netflix account. Check who's watching." That's when my stomach dropped. Our Netflix account. Not his old account, our account. The one we'd set up together when we moved in. I opened the app on my phone, went to the account settings, checked who was streaming. There were the usual devices, my laptop, his laptop, the TV in our living room. And then there was one I didn't recognize, a device in Denver, Colorado, and it was actively streaming right now. The same show we just started watching together 2 nights ago. I sat there staring at my phone, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone had hacked our account. Maybe it was nothing. I texted back, "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "I'm the dead girlfriend, and I'm very much alive." My hands started shaking. This had to be a prank, some sick joke. But then another message came through, and it was a photo. A photo of my fiancé, with a woman, sitting on a couch, his arm around her. And the photo metadata said it was taken 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when he'd told me he was visiting his mum. I texted back, "What is this?" She sent another photo, then another. Him cooking in a kitchen I didn't recognize. Him asleep in a bed that wasn't ours. Him kissing this woman on a balcony with Denver's skyline in the background. All recent, all within the last few months. Then she sent a message that made everything click into place. "I didn't know about you until yesterday. I saw your engagement post. Congratulations, by the way. He told me you were his mentally ill cousin he was helping get back on her feet. Said you were living with him temporarily while you got treatment. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity was so breathtaking, I didn't know what else to do. I called him. He answered cheerful, asked how my day was going. I said, I just got some interesting texts. Want to tell me about Denver? The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought he'd hung up. Then he started stammering, asking what I was talking about, saying he didn't know what I meant. I said, your dead girlfriend says hi, and she wants to know why you're using her Netflix account. Then came the breaking point. He tried to explain. He said it was complicated. He said she wasn't really his ex, she was just someone he'd been helping out, someone who was going through a hard time. He said the photos were old, that she was lying, that she was obsessed with him and making things up. Every single thing he said was a lie, and we both knew it. I told him I was going to Denver. He said I was being crazy, that there was nothing in Denver, that I was overreacting. I bought a plane ticket for the next morning. The woman, his apparently very alive ex-girlfriend, had already sent me the address. She said she wanted to meet me. She said she deserved to know what was happening just as much as I did. We'd been texting all night, comparing stories, filling in gaps. He'd been visiting her once a month, sometimes twice. Every grave visit, every weekend with Mum, every work trip for the last 2 years had been trips to see her. She thought they were in a committed relationship. She thought he was working remotely from her place half the time. She had no idea I existed until she saw the engagement announcement. I showed up at the Denver apartment at 10 in the morning. She was already there, waiting outside. We looked at each other for a second, both of us probably trying to figure out if this was real. Then we went inside together. He was there, just sitting on the couch, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Actually, 2 ghosts, both of his girlfriends, both very much alive, both standing in the same room staring at him. And here's where it gets absurd. He tried to run, actually tried to get up and walk out like we wouldn't stop him. We blocked the door. He started crying, saying he could explain, saying he loved both of us, saying he'd made mistakes but he could fix this. I asked how many apartments he had. He wouldn't answer. She asked how many other women there were. He wouldn't answer that either. We called the police. Not because we thought he'd committed a crime exactly, but because we genuinely didn't know what else to do, and he was acting increasingly unhinged. The police came, took statements, and that's when things got truly weird. They ran his information and found that he had active leases in 3 cities: Denver, where we were, Phoenix, where I lived with him, and Portland, where apparently he had another setup we knew nothing about. 3 apartments, 3 lives, 3 women, probably. The officer taking my statement actually said, I've seen this before, some people just can't commit to one place. I said, I think the problem is he committed to 3 places. They couldn't arrest him for having multiple leases, but they did make him give us access to his phone right there. We went through everything. The other woman's name was Rachel. She'd been dating him for 4 years. 4 years. She'd met him before I did, before his ex had supposedly died, which meant the whole tragic backstory was fabricated from the start. There was no car accident, there was no grave, there was just Rachel, living in Denver, thinking she was in a normal relationship with a guy who worked remotely and traveled for family stuff. We found evidence of the Portland apartment, messages with a landlord, references to someone named Maya. We didn't dig into that because honestly, we'd both seen enough. Rachel and I left together. We got coffee. We sat in a cafe in Denver comparing notes like we were collaborating on a research project about the worst man alive. She thought his secretive behavior was just him being private. I thought his emotional unavailability was grief. We'd both filled in his gaps with generous interpretations because we loved him and wanted to believe the best. He'd been juggling 3 entire relationships across 3 cities for years, maybe longer. The mental energy alone seemed exhausting. The logistics of remembering which story he'd told, which person, which lies he'd committed to, which version of himself he was supposed to be in each place. It was like he'd been running 3 separate simulations of his life and somehow keeping them all running simultaneously. I flew home the next day. I packed up everything he'd left at my place, put it in boxes, and left it in the hallway of our apartment building with a note that said, "Pick a city and stay there." I never saw him again. Rachel told me later that he'd tried to convince her I was the crazy one, that I'd made everything up, but she'd already seen too much. She moved out of the Denver apartment within a month. I found out about Maya eventually. Portland, 2 years. She found out about us through social media after everything blew up. Apparently, he'd told her we were his business partners, all three of us, strangers running different branches of his fake life, finally talking to each other in a group chat that felt more like a support group than anything else. The bracelet he wore, the one I thought was from his dead ex, was from Rachel. She'd given it to him on their first anniversary. He'd been wearing a gift from one girlfriend while proposing to another, while maintaining a third relationship in a separate state. The level of compartmentalization required for that felt almost pathological. I called off the engagement, obviously, cancelled the wedding we'd started planning, told our families the truth, which was humiliating but necessary. My mom asked how I didn't know. I didn't have a good answer, I just didn't. He was good at this, disturbingly good. Some people juggle lives in different cities, but the wife in this next story found out her husband's secret life was happening on international waters. I got cancelled about 8 months ago, or at least someone tried really hard to cancel me. It started small, just a Reddit post on one of those drama subreddit communities claiming I was a terrible person based on some texts I'd sent years ago. The texts were real, but they were so wildly taken out of context that they told a completely different story than what actually happened. Like, one of them was me venting to a friend about a coworker, and whoever posted it made it look like I was just randomly being cruel about someone for no reason. They'd cut out all the context, all the stuff about how this coworker had been harassing me for weeks. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured it would blow over, that people would realize the screenshots were sketchy and move on. But it didn't stop. Every few days, there was something new. More screenshots, more DMs that were supposedly from me, except some of them I knew for a fact I'd never sent. They were fabricated, edited, photoshopped, whatever. Someone was spending serious time and effort trying to destroy my reputation online. The posts started getting traction. People were digging up my social media, my LinkedIn, everything. I started getting messages from people I barely knew asking if the allegations were true. Someone sent the screenshots to my employer. I had to have an incredibly awkward conversation with HR, where I tried to explain that yes, some of those texts were real, but no, they didn't mean what people thought they meant. And also, some of them were completely fake. Here's the thing that made it so scary. Whoever was doing this knew me. They had to. They had access to real conversations, real information about my life. It wasn't just some random internet troll. It was someone close enough to have my private messages, my photos, details that only friends or family would know. I started going through everyone in my life trying to figure out who would want to hurt me like this. Ex-partners seemed like the obvious answer, but I'd ended all my relationships pretty amicably. Co-workers, maybe, but most of them barely knew me outside of work. Family seemed unlikely. That left friends, and the idea that one of my friends was actively trying to ruin my life made me feel physically sick. I couldn't prove anything, though. The Reddit account posting everything was anonymous. The screenshots could have come from anywhere. I felt completely helpless, just waiting for the next attack, watching my reputation crumble and having no way to stop it. That's when I decided to set a trap. I spent a few days thinking through exactly how to do this. I needed to create something convincing enough that whoever was leaking my information would take the bait, but specific enough that I could track exactly who had access to it. So I wrote a fake journal entry on my laptop. It was this whole dramatic confession about how I'd plagiarized a major paper in college, how I'd stolen someone else's work and passed it off as my own, how I'd been living with the guilt ever since. None of it was true. I'd never plagiarized anything in my life. But it was the kind of scandalous confession that I knew would be too juicy for whoever was doing this to resist. Here's where it gets specific. I created 4 different versions of the document. They were almost identical, but each one had a unique typo planted in a different spot. Version 1 had receive instead of receive. Version 2 had definitely instead of definitely. Version 3 had separate instead of separate. Version 4 had occurred instead of occurred. Little things that looked like natural mistakes, but that I could use to track which version got leaked. Then I had to figure out how to get different people to see different versions without it being obvious I was setting them up. I identified 4 people who had both motive and opportunity. My roommate Sarah, who I'd been having some tension with over bills, my friend Jake, who I'd beaten out for a promotion at work, my ex-friend Monica, who I'd had a falling out with a few months back, and my cousin Emma, who'd been weirdly competitive with me our whole lives. Over the course of 2 weeks, I carefully orchestrated situations where each of them had access to my laptop with a specific version of the document on it. With Sarah, I asked her to use my computer to print something while I was in the shower, and I'd left the document open on my desktop. With Jake, I had him help me troubleshoot a tech issue, and the file was sitting in my recent documents. With Monica, I left my laptop at a coffee shop where we were meeting and asked her to watch it while I took a phone call outside. With Emma, I let her borrow my computer to check her email at a family dinner. Each time, the corresponding version of the fake journal entry was in an obvious place. Not like I was shoving it in their face, but obvious enough that if someone was snooping, they'd find it. Then I waited. It took 6 days. 6 days of checking Reddit obsessively, refreshing the drama boards every few hours, watching for the journal entry to appear. And then it did. Someone posted my confession about plagiarism with a caption like, "She's been lying about her accomplishments this whole time," and a bunch of commentary about how I was a fraud. My hands were shaking when I opened the screenshot they'd posted. I zoomed in on the text, scanning for the typo, and there it was. Separate instead of separate, version 3, the version only Sarah had access to. My roommate, the person I lived with, the person I'd trusted with my space, my stuff, my life. She'd been the one selling me out this entire time. I didn't confront her immediately. I needed to be smart about this. I contacted a lawyer first, explained the whole situation, showed them my evidence, the different versions of the document, the timeline of when each person had access, the Reddit post with the specific typo that proved it was Sarah's version. My lawyer said it was enough to build a case, but recommended I try to get a confession on record if possible. So I set up another trap. I installed a recording app on my phone and then casually mentioned to Sarah that I'd seen the latest Reddit post about me. I said I was freaking out because now people thought I was a plagiarist, and I had no idea how this information got out, since I'd only written about it in my private journal. She played dumb at first, said how awful that was, how someone must have hacked my computer or something, but I kept pushing, kept saying how strange it was that this deeply personal thing I'd never told anyone was suddenly public. And that's when everything unraveled. She got defensive, started saying that maybe I shouldn't write about illegal stuff if I didn't want it getting out, that maybe I deserved to face consequences for my actions. I pointed out that she seemed really certain about what was in my journal for someone who supposedly hadn't seen it, and she just snapped. She admitted everything. Said she'd been leaking information about me to a drama commentary YouTube channel for the past 4 months. They'd been paying her for content, for screenshots, for dirt. She said she needed the money, and I was just sitting there with my cushy job and my nice life, and it wasn't fair. She said the channel had asked her to find more dramatic stuff, so she'd started fabricating some of the messages, editing screenshots to make me look worse. I had it all on recording, everything. Her admission that she'd been stealing my private information, that she'd been creating fake evidence, that she'd been doing it for money. The next day, I showed up with my lawyer, played her the recording, told her we were filing a lawsuit against both her and the commentary channel for defamation, invasion of privacy, and a bunch of other legal terms I barely understood. She completely fell apart, started crying, begging me not to sue, saying she'd do anything. My lawyer laid out the options. We could go to court, drag this out for months, make everything public. Or she could agree to a settlement, issue a public apology, and cooperate with our case against the channel. She chose the settlement. We went after the channel too, and they folded pretty quickly once they realized we had evidence that they'd been paying someone to fabricate content. We won a settlement that I can't discuss the details of, but let's just say it was enough to make the whole nightmare feel slightly worth it. Sarah had to post a public apology video, had to admit she'd been lying, fabricating evidence, trying to cancel me for money. Had to explain that the plagiarism confession was fake, that she'd leaked it knowing it wasn't true. The video got way more attention than any of the original cancel posts. Suddenly everyone who'd been coming after me was apologizing, saying they'd been manipulated, that they felt awful. But here's where it gets weird. Now I have this reputation as someone who's impossible to cancel because people don't know what's real anymore. Anytime someone tries to dig up dirt on me or post something negative, there are comments saying, "Didn't we learn from last time?" or "Is this another setup?" I've accidentally made myself cancel proof by proving I'm willing to trap people who come after me. Part of me feels vindicated. I caught someone who was actively trying to destroy my life, and I made sure they faced consequences. But another part of me feels kind of hollow about it, because I had to become paranoid and manipulative to protect myself. I had to suspect my friends, set elaborate traps, turn into someone who sees everyone as a potential threat. I still live with the fact that someone I trusted, someone I saw every single day, was selling stories about me for cash, that she'd look me in the eye over breakfast and then go leak my private messages for a few $100. And I can't help but wonder who else in my life would do the same thing if the price was right. I won. I proved she was lying. I got my settlement and my public apology. But I also lost the ability to trust people the way I used to. Every time I have a private conversation now, there's this voice in the back of my head wondering if it'll end up on Reddit. Every time someone gets too curious about my personal life, I wonder if they're gathering content. The trap worked. I caught her. But I think maybe I caught myself in it too. That's what happens when you turn the tables. But the person in our next story didn't just flip the script. They became the villain in their own story. I started noticing my photos showing up in weird places about 3 months ago. At first, it was just one or two pictures on some random Instagram meme page, the kind that posts vaguely relatable content with captions like "this energy" or "literally me." The photos were from my phone. Personal stuff. Me on vacation in Greece, me at a friend's wedding, me at a coffee shop on a random Tuesday. Nothing explicit or embarrassing, just normal pictures from my life. But they were mine, from my private camera roll. And I definitely hadn't posted them anywhere public. Then I saw them on a gossip blog. Some site I'd never heard of was running this whole article about mystery woman living her best life, with a slideshow of my photos. They'd made up this entire narrative about who I might be, speculating about my job, my relationships, my lifestyle, all based on pictures they had no right to have. The comments were full of people trying to figure out who I was, where I lived, whether I was an influencer trying to stay anonymous. It was surreal and deeply uncomfortable. Then came a Reddit thread. Someone had compiled like 15 of my photos and posted them with the title, "Who is this girl and why is she everywhere?" The thread had hundreds of comments. People were reverse image searching, trying to identify landmarks in the background, analyzing my clothes to figure out what brands I wore. Someone recognized a restaurant in one photo and narrowed down what city I lived in. I felt like I was watching strangers dissect my entire existence in real time. I was freaking out. I couldn't figure out how this had happened. I'm careful with my privacy settings. I don't post much online. I definitely don't have the kind of following that would make me interesting to gossip blogs or meme pages. So I did a reverse image search on one of the photos, and that's when I found it. The original upload was from an account tied to an email address I recognized. My best friend Sarah's email address, the one she'd been using since college, the one I knew by heart because we'd shared streaming passwords and online shopping accounts for years. I felt sick. I went through every photo that had been posted and traced them all back. Same account, same email. She'd been uploading my private photos to stock photo sites, content farms, anyone who would pay for authentic lifestyle content. I found the invoices. She was making $50 per photo. Some of them she'd sold multiple times to different sites. She'd made over $2,000 turning my private life into content. I called her immediately, asked her to meet for coffee, sat down across from her and pulled up the evidence on my phone, showed her the uploads, the email address, the payment receipts I'd found, asked her what the hell she was thinking. She looked at the screen for maybe 5 seconds, then laughed. Actually laughed. She said, "You're not even famous. Why are you being so dramatic about this? It's just a few photos." She said I should be flattered that people found my life interesting. She said I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal, that I needed to calm down. I told her she'd violated my privacy. She'd taken photos from my phone, probably when I'd left it unlocked around her, and sold them without my permission. That was theft. That was a betrayal of trust. We'd been friends for 8 years. She rolled her eyes and said I was acting like she'd leaked nudes or something. She said they were just vacation photos, and if I didn't want people seeing them, I shouldn't take them in the first place. Then she got up and left. Didn't apologize, didn't even pretend to feel bad. I sat there in that coffee shop for probably 30 minutes, just staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. My best friend had been selling my photos for $50 a pop and thought I was the problem for being upset about it. So I made a decision. About 6 months earlier, my ex-boyfriend had gotten semi-famous. He's a musician, got a song that went viral on TikTok, suddenly had a small but dedicated following. After we broke up, a few tabloid-style blogs and celebrity gossip sites reached out to me asking for interviews. They wanted the inside scoop on what he was really like, whether the breakup was messy, all that invasive nonsense. I'd ignored all of them because I'm not that person. I don't sell out people I used to care about for a tabloid story. But Sarah wasn't people I used to care about anymore. I went back through my messages and found the most recent request. It was from a writer at one of those digital tabloid sites that's always running exposés on influencers and minor celebrities. I replied and said I'd reconsidered. I said I didn't want to talk about my ex, but I had a different story they might be interested in. A story about someone who'd been running a scheme selling other people's private photos, who'd built her entire life on lies and secrets that were about to come out. We got on a call, I told them everything. But not just about the photos. I told them about her DUI from 2 years ago that she'd covered up by paying off the cop and getting the report buried. I told them about her college degree that she claimed was from a prestigious university, but was actually from an online diploma mill, which she'd used to get her current job in marketing. I told them about her affair with her sister's husband that had been going on for over a year, that her sister had no idea about, that she'd been documenting in her Finsta that she thought was private but wasn't, and I gave them screenshots of her selling my photos, complete with the payment receipts and her email address, screenshots of texts between her and her brother-in-law, screenshots of her fake diploma that I'd seen on her wall and reverse image search to find the template online. I gave them everything. They fact-checked it all, called the university, confirmed she'd never attended, found the DUI through some public records loophole, contacted her sister under the guise of a different story, and confirmed the affair timeline matched up. Everything I'd said was true, and they verified every single detail. The article ran 2 weeks later. Full exposé. They didn't use my name, just referred to me as a former friend and victim of her schemes. But they named Sarah. They included her job title, her company, everything. The headline was something like Instagram con artist built career on lies and stolen content. It went viral. Not huge viral, but big enough. Her company's social media got flooded with comments. People started digging into her background. Her LinkedIn got torn apart by people pointing out the fake degree. Someone found her Finsta and leaked the affair posts. She lost her job within 3 days. Her company put out a statement about terminating her employment due to misrepresentation of credentials. Her sister found out about the affair and confronted her, and their entire family imploded. Her boyfriend, who had no idea about the brother-in-law situation, left her immediately. She went from having a life that looked perfect on paper to having nothing. And here's where it gets absurd. She tried to sue me for defamation, actually got a lawyer and sent me a cease and desist, threatening to take me to court for ruining her reputation with lies. I forwarded it to the tabloid's legal team, and they laughed. Defamation requires the information to be false. Everything I'd said was true. Every single thing. They had the receipts, the fact checks, the verified sources. Her lawyer dropped the case after one conversation with the tabloid's lawyers. Now she sends me messages every few months, long rambling texts about how I ruined her life over some photos, how I'm a vindictive person who destroyed her career, her family, her relationship, all because I couldn't take a joke, how she hopes I'm happy now that she's struggling to find work and her sister won't speak to her. I don't respond. I just read them and then go about my day. Because here's the thing, I didn't ruin her life. She built her life on lies, on theft, on betrayal, on thinking she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I just made sure the truth came out. I didn't fabricate anything. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't even embellish. I just took all the secrets she'd been hiding and handed them to someone who would verify and publish them. She sold my private photos for $50 each and told me I was being dramatic. So I sold her secrets to a tabloid for free and slept just fine. Do I feel bad? Sometimes I think about whether I went too far, whether I could have handled it differently. But then I remember her laughing at me in that coffee shop, telling me I wasn't famous enough to matter, dismissing my privacy like it was nothing. And I remember that she had a choice. She could have apologized. She could have taken the photos down. She could have acknowledged that what she did was wrong. She chose to laugh instead. So I chose the nuclear option. And honestly, I'd do it again. Revenge tastes different when it's premeditated. And the ex in our next story learned that the best defense is a devastating offense. My brother died on a Tuesday. Heart attack. He was 34 years old, went to bed fine, and just didn't wake up. No warning signs, no history of heart problems, nothing. One day he was texting me memes and complaining about his job, and the next day I was picking out a casket with my parents. The funeral was brutal. He was young, he was healthy, he had his whole life ahead of him. Everyone kept saying it wasn't fair, like death is ever fair, like any of us get a say in when our time is up. I gave a eulogy. I don't remember what I said. I was on autopilot for weeks. The will reading was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral. I didn't expect much. My brother wasn't rich. He had a decent job in tech, owned a small house in the suburbs, but nothing extravagant. I figured he'd leave everything to our parents, maybe split some stuff between me and our younger sister. I went to the lawyer's office mostly because it felt like something I was supposed to do, not because I thought I'd actually inherit anything significant. The lawyer was this older guy, very formal, very by the book. He sat us all down in a conference room. Me, my parents, my sister, my aunt and uncle, a few cousins. He went through the standard stuff first. Some money to charity, his car to our dad, his record collection to a friend. Then he got to the big part. He said my brother had left me his house and $500,000. The room went completely silent. I just stared at him. That couldn't be right. Why would my brother leave me that much? We were close, sure, but not in a way that would explain $500,000 and a house. My parents looked just as shocked. My sister looked confused. My aunt looked angry, but she always looks angry, so I didn't think much of it at the time. The lawyer held up an envelope. He said there was a condition. I could only receive the inheritance if I read a sealed letter out loud to everyone in the room right now. If I refused or if I read it privately, the money and house would go to a mental health charity instead. My hands were shaking when I took the envelope. I didn't know what to expect. Some kind of last message? A joke? An explanation? I opened it carefully and started reading out loud. To my sister, who saved my life in 2019 without knowing it. You called me randomly at 3 a.m. drunk, rambling about a movie. I had written my suicide note and was holding pills. Your call stopped me. You talked for an hour about nothing. I never told you. This is my thank you. Use it well. I couldn't finish reading without my voice breaking. I didn't remember that call. I tried to think back to 2019, tried to remember a random 3 a.m. drunk dial, but I had no memory of it. I used to call people at weird hours back then when I'd had too much to drink, just rambling about whatever was on my mind. It was something I did. I never thought any of those calls mattered. My mum started crying. My dad just put his head in his hands. My sister reached over and grabbed my arm. For a minute, the whole room was just silent grief. This collective realization that my brother had been that close to dying years before he actually did, and none of us had known. Then my aunt stood up. She started screaming, actually screaming, saying I must have manipulated him, that he was mentally unstable, that I probably knew about the suicide attempt and used it to get written into his will. She said I was a con artist, that this whole letter was suspicious, that there was no way I just happened to call him at the exact right moment unless I knew something was wrong. I tried to explain that I didn't know, that I genuinely had no memory of the call, that I would never exploit my brother's mental health for money. But she wasn't listening. She kept yelling about how convenient it all was, how I'd always been manipulative, how she'd never trusted me. My uncle joined in, said the will should be contested, said my brother wasn't in his right mind when he wrote it, said someone who'd struggled with mental illness couldn't be trusted to make sound decisions about their estate. The lawyer tried to calm everyone down, but it was too late. My aunt announced right there that she was going to challenge the will in court. She said she'd prove I'd manipulated my brother, that I'd known about his struggles and exploited them. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The legal battle lasted 2 years, 2 full years of depositions, court dates, lawyers arguing over whether my brother had been competent when he wrote his will, whether I'd had undue influence, whether the whole thing was a scheme. My aunt hired an expensive lawyer who dug into every aspect of my relationship with my brother. They pulled our text messages, our call logs, everything. They found the voicemail, the one from that night in 2019. I didn't even know it existed, but apparently my brother had saved it. 3 minutes and 47 seconds of me, absolutely hammered, rambling about Inception, about how the ending didn't make sense, how dream logic is inconsistent, how Christopher Nolan thinks he's smarter than he is. I was slurring my words, laughing at my own jokes, completely oblivious to the fact that on the other end of the line, my brother was sitting with a bottle of pills trying to decide whether to take them. The lawyer played it in court. I had to sit there and listen to drunk me talking about a movie while sober. Me realized that conversation had saved my brother's life. It was surreal. It was devastating. It was proof that I hadn't known, that I genuinely had just called him randomly, that there was no manipulation or scheme. But my aunt didn't care. She argued that even if I hadn't known then, I must have found out later, that he must have told me at some point and I'd used it. She couldn't prove it, but she kept insisting it was true. We won the case eventually. The judge ruled that the will was valid, that my brother had been competent, that there was no evidence of undue influence. I got the house, I got the money, I got my inheritance. But I lost half my family in the process. My aunt hasn't spoken to me since the ruling. My uncle sends me hostile messages every few months about how I'm a terrible person. Some of my cousins took their side, decided I was guilty even though the court said otherwise. Family gatherings are nightmares now. Half the room won't acknowledge my existence. My parents tried to stay neutral at first, but eventually they had to pick a side. They chose mine, which meant my aunt accused them of being complicit in my supposed manipulation. Now my mom and her sister don't talk. Decades of relationship destroyed because my brother left me money and my aunt couldn't accept it. My sister stuck by me, but even she admits sometimes that she wonders. She doesn't think I manipulated him, but she wonders if maybe I did know about the suicide attempt and just forgot. If maybe he'd told me years ago and it slipped my mind. I can tell she's not fully convinced of my innocence, even though she supports me anyway. I still have that voicemail saved on my phone. I've listened to it maybe 100 times, trying to hear something in my voice that suggests I knew what was happening. Some hint of awareness. But there's nothing. Just drunk me, talking about a movie, accidentally saving a life without having any idea. I used some of the money to donate to suicide prevention charities, set up a fund in my brother's name. It felt like something he would have wanted, but even that got twisted. My aunt said I was only doing it for publicity, to make myself look good, to cover up my manipulation. I moved into his house last year. It still has his furniture, his books, his stuff everywhere. Sometimes I walk through the rooms and try to imagine him here, try to picture the night he almost didn't make it, the night my random drunk call gave him a reason to stay alive for one more day. The thing that haunts me most is that I don't remember the call. I saved my brother's life and I have no memory of doing it. I was too drunk, too wrapped up in my own nonsense about movies and dream logic to realize I was part of the most important moment of his life. And now he's gone anyway, and half my family hates me, and I'm living in his house surrounded by his things, holding an inheritance that cost me more than it was worth. I saved his life by accident, and somehow that destroyed my family anyway. The irony is almost unbearable. He lived because I called him drunk at 3 a.m., but maybe if I'd been sober, if I'd actually known what was happening, I could have gotten him real help. Maybe he would have worked through whatever was hurting him back then. Maybe he'd still be alive now. Or maybe that one call was all the time we were ever going to get, and I should just be grateful I made it. I don't know. I don't think I'll ever know. Sometimes the things we do without thinking have consequences we never see coming, which is exactly what happened when someone's camera roll revealed a truth they couldn't unsee. I borrowed my boyfriend's phone to look at the photos from dinner. We'd gone to this nice Italian place to celebrate his promotion, and he'd taken a bunch of pictures of the food, the wine, us being cute together. My phone was dead, and I wanted to send a few to my mum. He handed it over without hesitation, told me his passcode was still the same, went back to watching TV. I opened his camera roll and started scrolling back to find the dinner photos from earlier that night. And that's when I saw them. Screenshots, text message screenshots. of conversations between him and me. I almost scrolled past them, but something made me stop. The preview showed my name at the top and a message that said, "I'm sorry I've been so insecure lately." I didn't remember sending that. I clicked on the screenshot to see it full size. It was a whole conversation. Me apologizing for being needy. Him reassuring me. Me saying I didn't deserve him. Him saying I was perfect. Back and forth. This entire exchange about my insecurities and his patience. And I was staring at it thinking, when did we have this conversation? I checked the date on the screenshot. It was from 2 weeks ago. I went to my actual messages with him from 2 weeks ago. The conversation wasn't there. I scrolled through every message from that day, that week. Nothing even close to what was in the screenshot. I went back to his camera roll and kept scrolling. There were more, screenshot after screenshot of text conversations between us. Me apologizing for being too emotional. Me thanking him for putting up with me. Me saying I knew I was difficult and I'd try to be better. Him being supportive and understanding and perfect. None of these conversations existed. I'd never sent any of these messages. I'd never had any of these exchanges with him. My hands started shaking. I kept scrolling back further into his camera roll, and the screenshots just kept appearing. Dozens of them, some from a month ago, some from 2 months ago. All of them conversations that never happened, all of them painting this picture of me as insecure and apologetic and grateful for his patience. I sat there on his couch, holding his phone, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Did he somehow have the wrong camera roll? Was this from a previous relationship? But no, they had my name, my profile picture, the right contact information. He'd faked them. He'd created fake screenshots of conversations we'd never had. I looked over at him on the other side of the couch, still watching TV, completely oblivious. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like reality had just tilted sideways and I couldn't get my balance back. I said his name. He looked over, saw me holding his phone, saw whatever expression was on my face, and immediately went pale. I turned the phone toward him and asked what these were. He started stuttering, saying he could explain, reaching for the phone. I pulled it back and asked him again, "What are these screenshots?" He said he just wanted to remember the good parts of our relationship. I said these aren't the good parts. These are conversations that never happened. He said he knew. He said sometimes he just made them up because he wished we'd had those talks, because he wanted to remember our relationship a certain way. I stood up, asked him how many of these there were. He didn't answer, so I went to his Photos app and searched for screenshots. Hundreds of results. I opened his cloud storage. There was a folder labeled with my name. I clicked on it. There were hundreds of fake screenshots, text conversations, Instagram DMs, even emails I'd supposedly sent him. All of them fabricated. All of them showing me apologizing, praising him, being insecure, being grateful. Some of them were elaborate with multiple messages back and forth, timestamps, profile pictures, everything designed to look completely real. This is where patience finally snapped. I asked him why. Why would he do this? What was the point? He started crying, saying he didn't know, that he just wanted things to be perfect, that sometimes our actual conversations didn't go the way he wanted and he'd rewrite them to feel better. He said it wasn't hurting anyone, it was just for him, just something he did to cope. I asked him cope with what? He said cope with his anxiety about our relationship, with his fear that I'd leave him, with his need to feel like I needed him as much as he needed me. I looked at the screenshots again, looked at this alternate version of myself he'd created, this version who was always apologizing, always insecure, always grateful for his presence in my life. And I realized he'd been constructing a narrative where I was dependent on him, where he was the stable one, where I was the one with problems. Our actual relationship wasn't like that. I wasn't insecure, I didn't constantly apologize, I didn't tell him I didn't deserve him, but he'd created hundreds of pieces of fake evidence showing that I did. I asked him if he'd shown these to anyone. He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He admitted he'd shown a few to his friends when they asked how we were doing, to prove that we were solid, that I was committed, that things were good. He'd shown people fake screenshots of me, fake conversations where I was vulnerable and apologetic and not at all who I actually am. I left, walked out of his apartment with my dead phone and took an Uber home. Blocked him on everything. I didn't want to hear his explanations or his apologies or his justifications. But I couldn't just leave it there. Because if he'd shown these screenshots to his friends, who else had he shown them to? And what else had he faked? I called a mutual friend the next day, told her what I'd found. She went quiet for a long time, then said this wasn't the first time. His ex-girlfriend before me had found something similar. Fake screenshots, fake evidence of conversations, a whole constructed narrative of their relationship that didn't match reality. His ex had confronted him and he'd convinced her she was misremembering things, convinced her that they'd had those conversations and she'd just forgotten. He'd gaslit her using evidence he'd fabricated himself. She'd stayed with him for another year before finally leaving, and even then she wasn't sure what was real and what wasn't. My friend said she should have warned me but didn't know how to bring it up without sounding crazy. I told her it wasn't her fault, but inside I was screaming. How did he get away with this twice? How did no one think to warn people about him? I told everyone, every mutual friend, every person in our social circle. I showed them the screenshots I'd taken of his fake screenshots before I left. I wanted everyone to know what he was capable of. Wanted to make sure the next person he dated would hear about this. Some people believed me immediately. Some people thought I was exaggerating or misunderstanding. Some people said it was creepy but not that big a deal, that lots of people keep mementos of relationships. But it wasn't a memento. It was a construction, a false narrative built to make him feel in control. And he'd been doing it systematically for months, maybe years. Things went from bad to unhinged when I found out he'd also created fake screenshots of my conversations with other people. Conversations between me and my friends where I was supposedly complaining about them, talking behind their backs. He'd saved those too. I don't know if he ever planned to use them, but he had them. Ready to deploy if he ever needed to isolate me from my support system. He finally agreed to go to therapy after our mutual friends confronted him. Told him this wasn't normal, that this was a serious problem, that he needed professional help. I don't know if he actually went or if he just said that to make people stop asking. I went to therapy too, because I spent weeks questioning my own memory, wondering if maybe some of those conversations had happened and I'd just forgotten, wondering if I was the unreliable narrator. My therapist assured me that no, I wasn't losing my mind, that what he did was a form of psychological manipulation. I don't trust screenshots anymore. Anytime someone shows me a text conversation or a DM, I have this immediate suspicion. Is this real? Did this actually happen? How would I even know? We live in a world where anyone with basic photo editing skills can fabricate any conversation they want. And people believe screenshots because they look like proof. I think about those fake messages sometimes. The version of me he created, insecure, apologetic, grateful for scraps of his attention. It's like he was building a different person, someone easier to control, someone who fit the narrative he wanted, and he documented it all like it was real. The worst part is I'll never know what he planned to do with all of it. Was it just for his own comfort? Or was there some endgame I never saw coming? Would he have used those fake screenshots against me eventually? Would he have shown them to people to prove I was unstable or manipulative? Or whatever story he needed to tell? I dodged something. I don't know exactly what, but I know it was bad, and I'm grateful I found out when I did, before he had time to build an even more elaborate fiction. He's blocked on everything now. I heard from a friend that he started dating someone new a few months after we broke up. I thought about reaching out to her, warning her, but what would I even say? Your boyfriend might fabricate an entire alternate version of your relationship, and you won't know until you accidentally find the evidence. I didn't reach out. Maybe that makes me complicit in whatever happens next. Or maybe it's not my responsibility to save everyone from him. I saved myself. That has to be enough. Technology can create false realities, but sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight, like in The Wedding Planner, who had a side hustle destroying marriages. We hired Stephanie about a year before our wedding. She came highly recommended, had this gorgeous portfolio, amazing reviews, and the kind of energy that made you feel like your wedding was the most important event she'd ever planned. She wasn't cheap, but my fiancé said we should splurge because we only get married once. He was really adamant about hiring her specifically, which I thought was sweet. Most guys don't care about wedding planning, but he seemed genuinely invested in making our day perfect. Stephanie was incredible from the start, always available, always responsive, full of creative ideas. She'd text me updates, send me inspiration boards, schedule meetings at cute cafes where we'd go over centerpiece options and menu tastings. But what really impressed me was how much she worked with my fiancé directly. He'd go to vendor meetings with her, site visits, cake tastings. He said he wanted to be involved, that this was our day, not just mine. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a partner who actually cared about the details. There were so many meetings I couldn't make because of work, and he'd go without me. Stephanie would send me recaps afterward, always super detailed, always professional. She'd say things like, "Your fiancé has such great taste," or "He's so hands-on, you're so lucky." And I'd agree. I felt lucky. The wedding itself was perfect. Everything Stephanie planned went off without a hitch. The flowers were stunning, the food was amazing, the timeline ran smoothly. Everyone said it was the best wedding they'd ever been to. I remember dancing with my new husband at the reception, looking around at everything Stephanie had created, feeling so grateful we'd hired her. 6 months into our marriage, I was looking for a file on our shared laptop. We'd been talking about framing some wedding photos, and I thought maybe the photographer had sent us some high-res versions I'd saved. I was clicking through folders when I found one labeled Wedding Backup Files. I didn't remember creating it, but I figured it was probably contracts or vendor information. I opened it. It wasn't contracts. It was hundreds of emails and texts between my husband and Stephanie. Screenshots he'd saved. Entire conversations I was never supposed to see. The first one was dated 2 weeks after we hired her. Just a casual message from him saying he'd had a great time at the initial planning meeting and asking if she wanted to grab coffee sometime to discuss ideas. Her response was flirty. His response back was flirtier. Within a week they were sleeping together. I sat there scrolling through months of messages, texts sent while I was at work, emails sent while I was asleep, photos they'd exchanged, plans they'd made. They'd been having an affair throughout our entire engagement. Every vendor meeting he'd gone to alone wasn't actually a vendor meeting. Every site visit was an excuse to meet up with her. Every time he said he wanted to be involved in the wedding planning, what he really meant was he wanted time with her. There were messages from the week of the wedding, him saying he couldn't wait to see her. Her saying she'd make sure they had time alone. Logistics about when and where they could meet up without me noticing. But that wasn't even the worst part. There was an email chain about our photographer. Our original photographer, the one I'd loved, had suddenly cancelled on us 6 months before the wedding. Said she had a family emergency and couldn't do it anymore. I'd been devastated. Stephanie had swooped in with a solution, said she had a friend who was available and just as good. I'd been so grateful. The replacement photographer was fine, did a decent job, nothing spectacular, but nothing terrible. The emails revealed that Stephanie had convinced our original photographer to cancel, told her we were difficult clients, that we were constantly changing our minds, that we'd probably be a nightmare to work with. The photographer had backed out to avoid the headache, and Stephanie's friend who replaced her wasn't just a photographer, he was someone who gave them hotel room keys. During our venue tours, when I thought my fiancé and Stephanie were checking out reception spaces and talking about layouts, they were meeting up in hotel rooms. The photographer was facilitating their affair. I kept scrolling. There were messages from the night before our wedding, the actual night before. I'd been at the rehearsal dinner with my family and bridesmaids. He'd said he was going back to the hotel early because he had a headache and wanted to rest up for the big day. Stephanie had texted him the keycard number for our bridal suite, the room I was supposed to get ready in the next morning. They'd had sex there, the night before our wedding, in the room where I'd later put on my wedding dress and take photos with my bridesmaids. I think I sat at that laptop for 3 hours just reading everything. Every message, every photo, every casual mention of me that proved they both knew exactly what they were doing. She'd write things like, "Is the bride getting suspicious?" And he'd say no, that I was clueless, that I trusted him completely, which I had. I trusted him completely. The rage that hit me was like nothing I'd ever felt. Not sadness, not heartbreak, just pure, clarifying rage. I didn't confront him right away. I took screenshots of everything, downloaded every file, every message, every photo. I backed it all up in 3 different places. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed like nothing had happened. The next morning I called a divorce lawyer. Then I called a private investigator, told them both everything, showed them the evidence. The lawyer said I had a strong case for divorce. The PI said we could probably get more if we wanted to build a case against Stephanie too, so we set a trap. I called Stephanie and told her my husband and I wanted to do a vow renewal for our first anniversary. Said we'd loved our wedding so much that we wanted to recreate the magic. She was thrilled, said she'd love to work with us again, that it would be such an honor. We scheduled a meeting at a cafe, the same one where we'd done some of our original planning. She showed up so excited carrying her portfolio, talking about how romantic a vow renewal was. I had my lawyer there, I had my PI there, recording everything. I had a folder full of printed screenshots. I let her talk for maybe 5 minutes about her ideas for the renewal. Then I slid the folder across the table. She opened it. I watched her face go from confused to pale to panicked as she realized what she was looking at. Text between her and my husband, photos, emails about sabotaging our photographer, messages from the night before my wedding. I told her I was filing for divorce. I told her I was also suing her and her business for fraud and emotional damages, that she'd been paid to plan our wedding while actively sleeping with the groom and sabotaging vendors to facilitate her affair, that every contract she'd signed with us included clauses about professional conduct and conflicts of interest that she'd violated. She tried to deny it at first, said the messages were taken out of context, that nothing physical had happened, that I was misunderstanding, but the lawyer pointed out that we had recordings, screenshots, testimony from the photographer. We had everything. Things went from bad to unhinged. She started crying, saying she'd made a mistake, that she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me. I told her I didn't care. I told her she'd had sex with my husband in my bridal suite the night before my wedding, and I was going to make sure she never worked as a wedding planner again. The lawsuit took 8 months. We subpoenaed the photographer, who admitted he'd been giving them hotel rooms. We got testimonies from other vendors who'd noticed Stephanie spending inappropriate amounts of time alone with my husband. We proved that she deliberately interfered with our original photographer to benefit her affair. She lost her vendor license. The wedding planning board revoked her certification. Her business collapsed. Last I heard, she'd moved to a different state and was working retail. My ex lost half his assets in the divorce. The house we'd bought together, half his retirement accounts, half of everything. I kept the wedding china, which felt petty but satisfying. Every time I use those plates, I think about how much that wedding cost him in the end. He tried to apologize during the divorce proceedings, sent me long emails about how he'd made a terrible mistake, how he still loved me, how we could work through this. I didn't respond to a single one. My lawyer handled everything. People ask me sometimes if I regret having the wedding, knowing what I know now, if I wish I'd found out earlier, before we got married, before I spent all that money and time and emotion on a day that was built on lies. Honestly, no, because if I'd found out during the engagement, I might have just cooled off the wedding and walked away. But having the proof, having the marriage, having everything documented the way it was, meant I could destroy both of them legally. The marriage gave me leverage, the wedding gave me evidence, and the betrayal gave me motivation. I'm doing fine now, better than fine actually. I'm dating someone new, someone who doesn't make me feel like I need to check his messages or question his whereabouts. Someone who thinks wedding planners should just plan weddings. And every once in a while, I get a message from someone asking for a reference for Stephanie. Apparently, she's trying to rebuild her business under a different name in another state. I always respond. I always tell them exactly what happened. I always attach the court documents. At least that betrayal had a clear villain. But what happens when the person ruining your reputation is someone who doesn't even exist? My private medical records got leaked online about 6 months ago. I'm not going to get into specifics about my career because it's not relevant, but I'm a public figure. Not A-list famous, but enough that people know my name, follow my work, have opinions about me. I'd been managing a chronic illness for years, keeping it private because, honestly, it's nobody's business, and I didn't want it to define my professional life. I wanted to be known for my work, not my medical history. Then some hacker got into my doctor's patient portal and downloaded everything. My diagnosis, my treatment history, my medications, all of it. They posted it on 4chan with this whole manifesto about how I was faking my illness for sympathy points, how I was using a manufactured sob story to advance my career. The thread exploded. Within hours, it was on Twitter, Reddit, screenshots everywhere. People were analyzing my medical records like they were qualified to interpret lab results and specialist notes. My career started imploding immediately. Brands I worked with started distancing themselves. People were accusing me of lying about being sick, saying the leaked records proved I was exaggerating or making it all up. Never mind that the records literally confirmed everything I'd ever said about my health. People saw what they wanted to see. The narrative became that I was a fraud, that I'd been manipulating people, that I deserved to be exposed. I tried to respond rationally at first, posted a statement about medical privacy, about how leaking someone's health information is a crime, about how my illness was real and documented. It didn't matter. The internet had decided I was the villain, and nothing I said could change that. My mentions were a nightmare. I was getting death threats, people saying I should lose my platform, that I was scamming people who actually had real illnesses. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I was watching my entire career disintegrate in real time over something that was both completely true and completely private. And the worst part was, I had no way to fight back. The hacker was anonymous. The platforms hosting my records claimed they couldn't do anything because of free speech. I felt completely powerless. Then I had an idea. It was insane. It was desperate, but I was out of options. I created an anonymous account and claimed I was the hacker. I made a burner Twitter account, a burner Reddit account, all the usual anonymous internet stuff, and I posted a confession. I said I was the person who'd leaked my own medical records, that the whole thing had been a publicity stunt, that I'd orchestrated the entire leak to gain sympathy and attention. I knew it sounded crazy, but that's exactly why I thought it might work. The internet loves a conspiracy. People were already convinced I was lying about something, so why not give them a different lie to latch onto? I spent 3 days building the narrative. I created fake screenshots of my own computer, made them look like they'd been taken by someone who'd hacked into my system. I fabricated fake log files showing someone accessing my medical portal from my IP address. I wrote this whole detailed story about how I'd planned the leak, how I'd written the manifesto myself, how I'd deliberately stirred up controversy to get people talking about me. I made it believable. I included details that only I would know, things that made it seem like this anonymous account really was the hacker. I posted technical information that sounded legitimate enough to convince people who didn't know better, and I framed it all as this grand manipulation, this calculated move to boost my career. The internet ate it up. Within 48 hours, the narrative completely shifted. News outlets started running stories about how I'd allegedly leaked my own medical records as a publicity stunt. People started analyzing my recent posts, looking for evidence that I'd planned this all along. The conversation moved from, is she really sick, to, did she really fake hack herself? And here's where it gets absurd. A journalist reached out to my anonymous account asking for an interview. They wanted the full story, wanted to understand why I'd done it. I should have said no. I should have let the rumor die down on its own. But I was in too deep at this point, and I figured one more push might seal the narrative permanently. I agreed to the interview on the condition that it was anonymous and I could use a voice modulator. We did it over an encrypted call. I spent an hour explaining my plan in detail, how I'd carefully leaked my own records, how I'd written the manifesto to make it look like a hacker with a vendetta, how the whole thing was designed to generate sympathy and attention for my work. I even threw in fake regret, said I realized now that it had gone too far, that I hadn't anticipated the backlash would be so severe, that I just wanted to come clean. The journalist ate it up. They published the interview with the headline, Anonymous Hacker Confesses, Medical Records. Leak was elaborate publicity stunt. It went viral. Bigger than the original leak. Everyone was talking about it. The narrative became, she's unhinged but kind of a genius. People started grudgingly admiring the audacity of it. My mentions went from death threats to people saying things like, okay, that's actually pretty smart, and I'm not even mad, that's impressive. The heat died down. My medical situation became old news. People moved on to the next scandal, the next controversy. Brands started working with me again, framing me as this bold, unconventional figure who'd pulled off this wild publicity stunt. My career didn't just recover, it somehow got better. But that wasn't even the worst part. The actual hacker, the real person who'd stolen and leaked my medical records, is still out there. They're still anonymous. They still have access to who knows what other information about me or other people. But now everyone thinks the leak was something I orchestrated. The investigation into the actual crime basically stopped because law enforcement and the platforms all think it was a hoax I created. I accidentally gave myself the perfect cover story. No one's looking for the real hacker anymore because they think I am the hacker, and I can never tell anyone the truth. Because if I come out now and say, actually, someone really did steal my medical records, I was lying about lying, the backlash would be 10 times worse than the original leak. I'd be admitting to fabricating a confession, to manipulating journalists, to creating an elaborate false narrative. Everything I've rebuilt would collapse instantly, so I'm stuck living this lie. When people bring it up now, I have to play along, smile and give vague non-answers about whether the publicity stunt was real or if that was just another layer of the game. Let people think I'm some kind of 4D chess-playing mastermind, instead of just someone who was desperate and scared and made an insane decision. The irony is almost funny. I wanted privacy. I wanted my medical information to stay private. Now my medical information is permanently associated with this fake scandal I created, and I can never set the record straight about any of it. I think about the real hacker sometimes. Wonder if they saw the confession, if they know it wasn't them, if they're out there laughing at how I covered their tracks for them. Wonder if they'll strike again, leak something else, and I'll have to figure out how to spin that into another layer of my supposed publicity stunt. I created my own narrative to protect myself, and now I'm trapped in it. I've become the villain and the victim and the mastermind all at once, and none of it is real except for the original crime that everyone's forgotten about. The strangest part is that it worked. My career is fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm more successful now than I was before the leak. People think I'm edgy and fearless and willing to take risks. They have no idea that the risk wasn't calculated. It was just panic dressed up as strategy. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just let the original narrative run its course. Maybe people would have moved on anyway. Maybe I didn't need to construct this elaborate lie. But I'll never know now because I can't undo what I did. I turned myself into a character, and now I have to keep playing the role. The medical records that were supposed to ruin me became the foundation of a reputation I never wanted. And somewhere out there, the person who actually violated my privacy is completely off the hook because everyone thinks I did it to myself. I pretended to be the hacker who leaked me, and everyone believed it. Mission accomplished, I guess. Except I'm not sure what the mission even was anymore. Creating your own narrative is powerful, but sometimes you accidentally create a monster, which is exactly what happened when one accidental recording went viral for all the wrong reasons. My boss was the kind of person who made you fantasize about quitting in increasingly dramatic ways. He was sexist, condescending, and had this incredible talent for taking credit for everyone else's work, while simultaneously complaining that nobody on the team showed initiative. Every meeting with him was an exercise in patience. He'd interrupt women mid-sentence, call our ideas cute, and then present those exact same ideas to upper management as his own brilliant insights. I'd been documenting everything for months, keeping a journal of incidents, saving emails, building a case to take to HR. But I needed something concrete, something undeniable. So during one particularly terrible team meeting, I pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, and hit record. I kept it face down on the table next to my notebook, just another device in a room full of laptops and tablets, and then he started talking. It began as his usual nonsense about how our generation was too sensitive, how back in his day people just worked hard and didn't complain about microaggressions or whatever. Standard boomer boss rhetoric. I was tuning him out, just waiting for him to say something actionable, something HR couldn't ignore. But then he pivoted into this completely unhinged story. He started talking about a time early in his career when he'd accidentally ordered 1,000 staplers instead of 100. A simple decimal point error that resulted in the office being flooded with staplers. And instead of admitting the mistake or returning them, he decided to own it by stapling everything in the office. Documents that didn't need to be stapled, posters to walls, his boss's tie to his desk. He went on this 10-minute rant about how he'd asserted dominance through aggressive stapling, how it taught him that the key to leadership was committing fully to your mistakes instead of apologizing for them. It was absolutely insane, but it was also kind of hilarious in this absurd, you can't make this up way. The entire team was just sitting there in stunned silence while he acted out stapling motions and talked about the psychological impact of stapling your coworker's lunch to the break room table. I recorded the whole thing. Figured even if HR didn't care about the sexism, they might care that our department head was bragging about property damage and harassment from 20 years ago. After the meeting, I sent the recording to my work friend Michelle DeVent, just a "you will not believe what just happened" kind of message. She listened to it and sent back a bunch of crying laughing emojis. Said her boyfriend needed to hear this. I said sure, whatever, I just needed someone else to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. Michelle sent it to her boyfriend Derek. Derek thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. And Derek, without asking either of us, posted it on TikTok. He didn't use any names. Just posted the audio with some stock footage of an office and a caption like, POV. Your boomer boss explains his management philosophy. He thought maybe a few of his friends would get a laugh out of it. It got 15 million views in 3 days. People thought it was satire. They thought it was a comedy sketch, some brilliant improvised bit about toxic management culture. The comments were filled with people saying it was the best corporate parody they'd ever heard, that whoever wrote it deserved an award. Someone made a remix where they auto-tuned the stapler story over a beat. Motivational LinkedIn accounts started using clips of it ironically, with captions about ownership and leadership. My boss became a meme. His voice, his completely sincere rant about staplers, became the soundtrack to thousands of videos about bad bosses and corporate absurdity. And then he found out it was him. I don't know how he discovered it. Maybe someone he knew saw it and recognized his voice. Maybe he was just scrolling TikTok and stumbled across his own management philosophy going viral. But about a week after the video blew up, he called an emergency team meeting. I thought I was about to get fired. I thought Michelle had confessed, or Derek had somehow been traced, or the company had done some kind of investigation. I walked into that conference room, preparing to clean out my desk. Instead, my boss stood at the front of the room, beaming. Actually beaming. He pulled up the TikTok on the projector and said he had an announcement. He'd been recognized. His leadership insights had resonated with millions of people. And he wanted to thank us, his team, for being part of his journey. He thought it was intentional. He thought someone on the team had recorded him and posted it as a way to showcase his brilliant management style. He thought this was corporate branding. I sat there frozen, watching him talk about how this was a sign that his unconventional methods were finally being appreciated, that the world was ready for his message about radical ownership and not apologizing for bold decisions. Then came the breaking point. He started a LinkedIn, posted daily insights about management, leadership, owning your mistakes by stapling things. His post went viral too because people still thought it was satire. Corporate accounts followed him ironically. A publisher reached out about a book deal. Within 2 months, he had a podcast. The Stapler Method, Leadership Through Radical Ownership. He'd interview other managers, talk about his philosophy, tell that stapler story over and over again to audiences who thought he was doing a bit. He got invited to speak at conferences. HR started treating him like a company asset instead of a liability. Upper management loved that someone from our office was getting this kind of attention. They didn't care that the attention was ironic. They just saw the numbers. And through all of this, he kept thanking me, thanking the whole team, but me specifically, for supporting him and being part of his rise. He'd mention in meetings how grateful he was that we'd believed in his message enough to share it with the world. I never told anyone I was the one who recorded it. Michelle and Derek figured it out, obviously, but we all agreed to never speak of it. Derek took the video down after it had already been reposted thousands of times, so it didn't matter. The clip lived on in compilations and meme accounts and LinkedIn think pieces. My plan to get him fired had somehow made him famous, and now he was completely untouchable. He's more insufferable than ever. The podcast has made his ego absolutely unbearable. He quotes himself constantly. He signs off emails with, "Remember, staple your mistakes to the wall." He's writing a book, an actual book that a real publisher is going to print and distribute. I tried going to HR anyway, a few months after everything blew up. Brought them my documentation of sexist comments, credit stealing, all of it. They listened politely and then explained that our boss was now a public figure representing the company brand. Any action against him would need to be carefully considered given his platform and following. They basically told me to deal with it. The worst part is I can't even complain about it publicly. If I told anyone I was the one who leaked the recording, Derek would get in trouble for posting it without permission. Michelle would get dragged into it, and my boss would probably try to make me part of his narrative somehow, say I was his secret protege, or something equally horrifying. So I just sit in meetings, listening to him talk about radical ownership while he steals credit for our work and mansplains basic concepts to women on the team. Except now when he does it, people film it and post it thinking he's doing a character. His sexism has become performance art. His incompetence is content. I created a monster. I thought I was gathering evidence to end his career, and instead I launched it into the stratosphere. He thanks me weekly for being part of his journey, completely oblivious to the fact that his journey started with me trying to get him fired. The book comes out next month. He's already told us we're all getting acknowledgements. My name is going to be in a published book about stapler-based management philosophy, written by a man who once told me to smile more in client meetings. I look for new jobs constantly, but everywhere I interview, someone has heard of my boss. They ask what it's like working for him, whether he's really like that. I don't know how to explain that yes, he really is exactly like that, and it's not a bit, and I hate every second of it. He's planning a speaking tour, corporate events, leadership conferences, college business programs. He's going to spread his message about ownership and staplers and not apologizing to thousands of future managers who will think they're in on a joke but will actually just absorb his terrible advice. And I have to watch it happen, have to smile and nod and accept his gratitude for supporting his brand. Have to pretend I think it's great that he's becoming more successful and influential every day. Fame changes people, but some people were always hiding something dark, like the mum who had a secret basement resident for years. My mum died 3 months ago. Cancer. She fought it for 2 years, and I was with her through all of it. We were close, or at least I thought we were. I thought I knew everything about her. After the funeral, I had to deal with her house, the house I grew up in, the house where it had been just me and her after my dad died when I was 6. I started in her bedroom, sorting through clothes and papers, trying to figure out what to keep and what to donate. That's when I found the diary. It was in her nightstand underneath some old photos and receipts. A plain leather journal, nothing fancy. I almost didn't open it because it felt like an invasion of privacy. But she was gone, and I figured maybe it would help me feel close to her again. Maybe there'd be some memories in there, some stories I'd never heard. I opened to the last entry. It was dated a week before she died. Just one line. He'll be okay now. I did what I could. I had no idea what that meant. He who? I kept reading backward, flipping through pages of her handwriting, looking for context. And that's when I found it. For 12 years, my mum had been hiding a man in our basement. His name was Marcus. He'd been one of her students when she taught high school English. When he was 17, he'd shown up at our house in the middle of the night, terrified, with bruises on his face and arms. His home life was violent. His dad was abusive. He had nowhere else to go. And my mum, instead of calling the police or child services, had let him into our basement and told him he could stay. I read through entry after entry, my hands shaking. She documented everything. How she'd set up a bed for him down there. How she bought him clothes and toiletries. How she brought him meals 3 times a day. How she helped him study for his GED while he was hiding from his family. She had rules. He could only come upstairs when I was at school. He had to stay completely quiet during my sleepovers with friends. He couldn't make any noise that might make me ask questions. She bought 2 of everything at the grocery store. 2 gallons of milk, 2 loaves of bread, extra cans of soup. I'd always thought she was just bad at meal planning, that she overshopped out of habit. I kept reading. Marcus got his GED. Then he enrolled in online college courses. My mum paid for them. She bought him textbooks, a laptop, helped him with his essays. He got a degree in computer science, got a remote job, started making his own money. But he still lived in our basement because he had nowhere else to go, and my mum wouldn't let him leave until he was stable. For 12 years, there was someone living underneath my bedroom, and I never knew. I thought about all the times I'd complained to my mum that our grocery bills were too high. All the times I'd wondered why she bought so much food when it was just the 2 of us. All the times I'd heard weird noises in the house and she'd told me it was just the old pipes or the foundation settling. She'd been lying to me for over a decade, keeping this massive secret, hiding a whole person in our house. But that wasn't even the worst part. I went down to the basement. I'd barely been down there since I was a kid. It was always just storage, or at least that's what I thought. My mom had always discouraged me from going down there, said it was dusty and full of junk and I didn't need to worry about it. The basement was finished. There was a bedroom set up in the corner, a real bed made neatly with clean sheets, a desk with a lamp, bookshelves full of novels and textbooks, a small TV, a mini fridge. It looked like a studio apartment. He wasn't there. The room was empty, but there were signs of him everywhere. A jacket hanging on the back of a chair, a coffee mug on the desk, and on the bed, a note. It was addressed to my mum, dated a week before she died, the same day as her last diary entry. It said, "Thank you for everything. You saved my life. I'll never forget what you did for me. I'm sorry I couldn't say goodbye in person. I hope your daughter understands one day." I stood there in that basement bedroom, holding this note from a stranger I'd lived with for 12 years without knowing he existed, and I didn't know whether to scream or cry. I hired a private investigator. I needed to know who this person was, needed to know if my mum had been taken advantage of, if this was some kind of scam, if there was more to the story than what she'd written. It took 2 weeks, but the PI found him. Marcus Chen, 29 years old, software engineer at a tech company in Seattle, married, 2 kids, normal life, completely normal. The PI gave me his contact information. I stared at it for days before I worked up the courage to call. When he answered, I told him who I was. There was a long silence. Then he said, "I've been wondering if you'd find out." We met at a coffee shop. He showed up with his wife, said he wanted her there for support. He looked nervous. I probably looked furious. He told me everything, confirmed what my mum had written in her diary. His dad had been violently abusive. His mum had left when he was young. He had no other family. When he was 17, his dad had beaten him so badly he'd thought he might die. He'd run to the only person he trusted, my mum, his English teacher, the one adult who'd ever been kind to him. She'd let him stay in the basement that night, then the next night, then the next. Weeks turned into months. She helped him get his documentation so he could work legally, helped him apply to college, helped him build a life. He said he'd offered to leave so many times, said he felt guilty taking up space in our house, but my mom had insisted he stay until he was truly stable, until he had enough money saved, until he felt safe. He stayed for 12 years, and here's where it gets absurd. He'd wanted to tell me, multiple times. He said he hated hiding, hated being the secret, but my mum had been adamant that I couldn't know. She said I was too young to understand at first, and then later she said it had gone on so long that telling me would be too complicated, that I'd be angry she'd lied for so long. She was right about that last part. Marcus said my mom was the kindest person he'd ever met, that she'd saved his life, literally, that without her he would have either ended up back with his abusive father or homeless or dead. He said he owed her everything. He showed me photos on his phone, him and my mom at his college graduation. She'd gone to the ceremony, told me she was visiting a friend that day, him and my mom at his wedding. She'd told me she was at a work conference. Photos of his kids, my mom holding them as babies. She'd said those were pictures of her co-workers' grandkids. So many lies, so many moments she'd been living this parallel life I knew nothing about. Marcus pulled out an envelope, said my mum had asked him to give this to me if I ever found out. Inside was a letter. She wrote that she was sorry for lying, that she knew I'd be angry, that she'd wanted to tell me so many times, but never found the right moment. She said she'd done what she thought was right, that she couldn't turn away a child who needed help, that she hoped one day I'd understand. She said Marcus was like a son to her, that helping him had given her life purpose after my dad died, that watching him build a life had been one of her proudest accomplishments. She said she loved me and she loved him, and she was sorry those two things had to exist in separate worlds. I don't know how to feel. I'm angry she lied to me for so long. I'm confused about why she felt like she couldn't tell me. I'm sad that she carried this secret alone. I'm weirdly impressed that she managed to hide a whole person for over a decade. I'm grateful that she helped someone who needed it. I'm hurt that she didn't trust me with the truth. Marcus and I talk sometimes now. Not often, but occasionally. His kids call me Aunt, which feels surreal. He's a good person, a normal person who had a terrible start and got lucky that my mum was the kind of woman who'd hide a teenager in her basement, rather than let him go back to an abusive home. I found out my mum bought the house next door to hers 5 years ago, put it in Marcus's name. She told me she was investing in rental properties. Turns out she just wanted to make sure he had a place to live when he finally moved out of our basement. When he got married, she signed it over to him completely. He still lives there, right next door to my childhood home. I'm selling my mum's house. I can't live there knowing what I know. Can't walk past that basement without thinking about all the years someone was down there while I was upstairs living my life completely oblivious. Marcus asked if he could buy it, said he'd like to keep it in the family. I said yes, seemed right somehow. Some secrets are kept to protect people, but other secrets, like the one involving a dad's best friend, destroy the very foundation of a family. My ex and I had a spectacularly messy breakup, the kind where both people say things they can't take back, where every conversation turns into a fight, where you're not even sure why you're still talking, except that neither of you wants to be the one who walks away first. We'd been together for 3 years, and the end was ugly. Screaming matches, accusations, betrayals on both sides. It wasn't one person's fault. We were both toxic. We brought out the absolute worst in each other. About 2 weeks after we finally ended it for good, I got a message from a mutual friend. She said my ex had been posting in his close friend story on Instagram, talking about how he was going to expose the truth about me, how everyone thought I was so sweet and innocent, but he knew what I was really like, how he had receipts and was going to show everyone who I really was. She sent me screenshots. He was calling me abusive, manipulative, a cheater. He was telling people I'd gaslit him for years, that I'd isolated him from his friends, that I'd made him feel crazy. And here's the thing, some of that was probably true. Not the cheating, I never cheated. But was I manipulative sometimes? Yeah, probably. Did I say things designed to hurt him during fights? Absolutely. Did I weaponize his insecurities when I was angry? I'm not proud of it, but yes, we were both terrible to each other. That's what happens when two people stay in a relationship years past its expiration date. But I also knew that he was projecting. Everything he was accusing me of, he'd done worse. He'd actually cheated multiple times. He'd been verbally abusive, calling me names, screaming at me in public. He'd threatened me, manipulated me, made me feel like I was losing my mind. I had proof of all of it, screenshots, recordings, messages from his friends apologizing for his behavior. I knew what he was planning. He was going to post some long expose on social media, probably Twitter or Instagram, painting himself as the victim and me as the villain. And I knew how these things worked. Whoever posts first controls the narrative. Whoever gets their story out there first becomes the victim, and the other person spends the rest of their life trying to defend themselves against an accusation that's already taken root. So I decided to beat him to it. I spent an entire night putting together a thread. I wrote everything out carefully, kept my tone calm and factual, made sure I sounded reasonable and hurt but not vindictive. I explained our relationship, the good parts and the bad parts, and then I explained why it ended. I included screenshots of his messages where he admitted to cheating, screenshots of him threatening to ruin my reputation if I didn't take him back. I included a recording I'd made during one of our fights where he was screaming at me, calling me worthless, telling me no one else would ever want me. I didn't make myself look perfect. I admitted I'd said hurtful things too, that I'd made mistakes, that we'd both been toxic. But I made sure the evidence showed that he'd been worse, that he'd been the aggressor, that his accusations of me being abusive were projection. I posted it at 6 in the morning, before he woke up, before he had a chance to get his version out first. By the time he saw it, it had 50,000 retweets. People were calling him a narcissist, an abuser, a manipulator. They were quoting my threads, adding their own stories about similar relationships, praising me for being brave enough to speak out. Feminist accounts were reposting it. Abuse survivor accounts were sharing it. Within hours, I'd become this symbol of someone who'd escaped a toxic relationship and wasn't afraid to tell the truth. He tried to post his version later that day, tried to claim I'd twisted everything, that I'd manipulated the narrative, that I was lying, but no one believed him. Everyone had already decided I was the victim and he was the abuser. His friends started distancing themselves from him. His new girlfriend, the one he'd started seeing a week after we broke up, left him. People were commenting on all his posts, calling him out, tagging him in my thread, telling him he was trash. He tried to delete everything, his Instagram, his Twitter, his Facebook. But the internet is forever. People had already screenshotted his attempted defense. already archived everything. He couldn't make it go away. I got hundreds of messages from people supporting me, telling me I was brave, calling me an inspiration, sharing their own stories of abuse, and thanking me for giving them the courage to speak out. I became this accidental advocate for abuse survivors, this person who'd stood up to her abuser and won. And here's where it gets complicated. I wasn't brave, I was strategic. I knew exactly what I was doing when I posted that thread. I knew how social media works, how people respond to victim narratives, how to frame a story so that you come out looking sympathetic. I weaponized vulnerability. I took something real and painful and turned it into a PR campaign. And it worked so well that I basically destroyed his reputation while protecting mine. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that I wasn't entirely honest. I left things out. I didn't mention the times I went through his phone and confronted him about conversations that were perfectly innocent. I didn't mention the time I lied about where I was because I knew he'd be mad if he found out I was hanging out with my ex from college. I didn't mention that I could be cold and withholding and cruel when I wanted to hurt him. I painted myself as this reasonable person who tried so hard to make things work, and him as this monster who'd abused and manipulated me. The truth is, we were both terrible. We both hurt each other. We both said unforgivable things. We both stayed in a relationship that should have ended years earlier. But I got to control the narrative, so now I'm the survivor and he's the abuser. And I can't take it back now. I can't admit that I was also toxic, that I also contributed to how bad things got, because I've become this symbol. People look up to me. They see me as someone who escaped abuse and had the courage to speak out. If I admitted now that I was also part of the problem, it would undermine everything. It would make people question whether any of it was true. It would make me look like a liar. So I'm stuck playing this role. The brave survivor, the woman who stood up to her abuser, the inspiration. But late at night, when I'm alone, I think about what I did. I think about how I strategically destroyed someone's reputation before they could destroy mine. I think about how I used the language of abuse and survival to win a breakup. I think about how I've become this person everyone admires, when really I was just better at social media than he was. I won the PR war. I got the sympathy, the support, the validation. He lost his friends, his girlfriend, his reputation. Mission accomplished. But I'm not sure I'm the hero everyone thinks I am. I get messages sometimes from people in similar situations, asking for advice on how to leave their abusive partners. And I want to help them, I really do. But I also know that my situation wasn't as black and white as I made it seem. I wasn't just a victim, I was also someone who fought dirty, who said cruel things, who hurt someone I claimed to love. There's this version of me that exists now in the public consciousness, the brave survivor who exposed her abuser and refused to be silenced. And there's the real me, who knew exactly what she was doing when she posted that thread at 6 in the morning, who calculated every word for maximum impact, who weaponized trauma for strategic advantage. I don't regret it exactly. If I hadn't posted first, he would have. He would have controlled the narrative and I would have spent years defending myself against his accusations. At least this way, I got ahead of it. At least this way, I protected myself. But I also created a version of our relationship that wasn't entirely true. I made myself into a victim and him into a villain, when really we were just two people who brought out the worst in each other and didn't know when to walk away. The internet decided I was right. They decided he was the bad guy and I was the survivor. And maybe that's close enough to the truth that it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter that I left out the parts where I was also cruel, also manipulative, also toxic. Maybe all that matters is that I won. But winning the narrative is a dangerous game, because once you've claimed the victim role, you can't unclaim it. Once you've told the world your story, you can't revise it. You're stuck with whatever version you put out there first. And I put out a version where I'm the hero. So that's who I have to be now, even when I know the truth is more complicated. Winning the narrative is a dangerous game, especially when the other person has secrets that could bring down everyone, which is exactly what happened in this family implosion. My coworker Sarah had been filing anonymous HR complaints about me for months. At first, I thought it was just bad luck, or maybe I'd genuinely upset someone without realizing it. The complaints were always vague but serious enough that HR had to investigate. Things like I was creating a hostile work environment, undermining her projects, making inappropriate comments in meetings. Every time HR would call me in, ask questions, interview people, review emails, and find nothing substantial, they'd close the case and tell me not to worry about it. But it was exhausting. Every few weeks, another complaint, another investigation, another round of my coworkers being questioned about whether I was some kind of toxic presence in the office. My reputation was taking hits, even though I was never formally reprimanded. People started looking at me differently, wondering if maybe there was something to all these complaints, even if HR couldn't prove it. I knew someone was targeting me, but I had no idea who or why. The complaints were always anonymous, always submitted through the company's confidential reporting system. HR wouldn't tell me who was filing them, said it would violate the whistleblower protection policy, so I was just stuck defending myself against invisible accusations every few weeks. Then I started noticing a pattern. The complaints always came in exactly 30 minutes after our weekly team meetings, every single time. Like clockwork, team meeting at 10 a.m. Tuesday, complaint filed at 10:30, team meeting at 2 p.m. Thursday, complaint filed at 2:30. It was too consistent to be a coincidence. I requested my full HR file through our company's transparency policy. Took them 2 weeks to compile it, but they eventually sent me everything. All the complaints, all the investigation notes, all the timestamps. I went through every single one and confirmed what I'd suspected. Every complaint was filed within a 30-minute window after our team meetings, and they all used the same generic company email format, the kind that gets generated when you submit something through the anonymous portal. But more importantly, they all used the same phrases, the same language patterns, the same grammatical quirks. I'm in IT. I have access to things most people don't think about, including Wi-Fi logs and network activity reports. I pulled the logs for every timestamp when a complaint had been filed, cross-referenced them with device IDs connected to our office network, and there it was. Every single complaint had been submitted from the same laptop. Sarah's laptop. Sarah, who sat 3 desks away from me. Sarah, who smiled at me every morning and asked about my weekend. Sarah, who I'd helped train when she started 6 months ago. Sarah, who'd applied for the same senior position I was being considered for. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I started digging deeper. I went through our shared email servers, our Slack logs, anything I had legitimate IT access to, and I found exactly what I was looking for. Emails from Sarah to her friends outside the company, sent from her personal Gmail, but accessible because she'd sometimes forwarded work documents to herself. In those emails, she explicitly talked about wanting my promotion, about how she needed to make me look bad so management would choose her instead. About how the anonymous complaints were her way of creating doubt about my professionalism. There were Slack messages too, DMs with people from other departments where she joked about getting rid of me, about how she was playing the long game, about how HR couldn't do anything to her because the complaints were anonymous. She documented her entire scheme in writing, scattered across multiple platforms, never thinking anyone would piece it together. I compiled everything. The timestamps of the complaints matched to her laptop's IP address, screenshots of her emails admitting she wanted my job, screenshots of her Slack messages joking about filing false reports, network logs showing her device activity. I put it all in a folder, organized it chronologically, made it impossible to misinterpret. Then I made a decision that probably wasn't ethical, but felt incredibly satisfying. I didn't go to HR. Instead, I accidentally left the folder open on our shared company drive, just sitting there in a folder labeled HR Documentation Review, where anyone on our team doing their normal work might stumble across it. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't tell anyone it was there. I just left it somewhere visible and let nature take its course. By noon, everyone knew. People talk, especially when they find a folder full of evidence that a coworker has been systematically trying to destroy someone's career with false complaints. The folder got passed around, screenshots got taken. People who'd been questioned during HR's investigations suddenly had context for what had really been happening. Sarah was called into HR that afternoon. By the next morning, she was on administrative leave. 48 hours later, she was officially terminated for filing false complaints, misusing company resources, and violating the anonymous reporting system's integrity. I should have felt vindicated. I should have felt like justice had been served. And I did, mostly. But there was this uncomfortable truth sitting in the back of my mind that I couldn't ignore. Some of those comments she'd reported me for, I actually did make them. They weren't fireable. They weren't harassment or discrimination or anything that would have gotten me in serious trouble. But they weren't great either. A sarcastic remark here, a dismissive comment there, the kind of stuff that happens in offices but probably shouldn't. The kind of stuff that if someone called you out on it directly, you'd apologize and move on. But if someone reported it anonymously to HR repeatedly, it started to look like a pattern of behavior. Sarah was absolutely a snake. She'd weaponized the reporting system to try to tank my career so she could take my promotion. She'd lied in most of her complaints, exaggerated in others, and created a hostile environment by making everyone paranoid about being investigated. But she wasn't entirely wrong about me. I'm not proud of some of the things I said in those meetings. The comments about her ideas being half-baked, the joke I made about her presentation skills that was funny to me but probably humiliating to her. The time I cut her off mid-sentence because I thought her point was irrelevant. None of it was malicious, but it wasn't kind either. If she'd just talked to me directly, told me I was being a jerk, I would have apologized and adjusted my behavior. Instead, she went nuclear, and I went nuclear back. The promotion went to neither of us, which felt like poetic justice. Management decided the whole situation was too messy and brought in an external hire instead. So we both lost what we were fighting over. I'm still at the company, still in IT, still have access to all the logs and data that let me build my case against Sarah. And now everyone knows it. People are weirdly careful around me now. They know I can see their network activity, their login times, their file access history. They know if they try something shady, I'll probably catch it. It's made me powerful in a way I didn't anticipate, but it's also made me isolated. Nobody wants to be friends with the person who can pull receipts on everything they do. I think about Sarah sometimes, wonder if she found another job, if she learned anything from getting fired, if she tells people what happened or just makes up a story about corporate politics. I wonder if she still thinks about me, if she regrets going after me the way she did, or if she just resents that I had better receipts. The truth is, we were both playing the same game. She was just sloppier about it. I had access to information she didn't, tools she couldn't use, and just enough technical knowledge to turn her own tactics against her. She tried to get me fired with anonymous complaints. I leaked her anonymous complaints with traceable evidence. She was a snake, but she wasn't entirely wrong. I just had better receipts. And in office politics, that's all that matters. Sweet dreams, everyone. And remember, the internet never forgets. Screenshots last forever. And sometimes the person you're trying to expose has already written the ending. If you made it this far through all 15 stories of chaos, betrayal, and strategic revenge, you're officially part of the Drama Addicted Club. Hit subscribe, drop a comment telling me which story shocked you most, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, maybe double check who you're sending that email to. Just saying. Rest well, and may your secrets stay secret, unless you're using them as leverage.